Okay, hello everyone. I'm joined with Mike, who runs the channel Heal Your Gut Guy. Now, normally when I have debates on nutrition, they're fairly general. They just go over the overall health effects of different diets, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, life expectancy. This is going to be a very focused debate, and we're going to talk about elevated serum cholesterol and its effect on heart disease risk. So it's going to be very focused. Now, my position is that elevated serum cholesterol definitely does increase risk of heart disease. It's the cause of atherosclerosis or ischemic heart disease, clogged arteries. And I would define elevated serum cholesterol as an LDL above 70 milligrams per deciliter and a total cholesterol above 140. I'll get into the reason for that in a bit, but we can generally define elevated cholesterol as anything above normal. So why don't you start us off? Why do you think elevated serum cholesterol is not a risk factor for heart disease, ischemic heart disease, or atherosclerosis?
That's a good question. So I kind of come from the background, like a Weston A. Price background, where we're looking to how our healthy primitive ancestors ate, and mostly I'm focusing on gut health related things. So I kind of these past couple of weeks I've been diving into heart health and artery health, and have found quite a few like interesting things. So a lot of these native populations were eating very high foods in cholesterol. And when I was looking at, and when I started to like look into more about the heart health of things, they were eating these high levels of cholesterol, but their cholesterol levels, their LDL levels, were still low, which was pretty interesting, because you would think it would skyrocket. And when we look at lab studies on how they're inducing atherosclerosis and heart disease in rats, you'll see that they're feeding them a high cholesterol diet, and their cholesterol is kind of like skyrocketing through the roof. So I started kind of like, I think it'd be like a good idea to first kind of talk about like, what LDL and HDL and atherosclerosis is, and kind of like the different types of arteries and stuff like that. But can I share my screen? I think I can share my screen, my
Yeah, sure.
screencast.
I don't actually know how to do that. It would be helpful. I think there's a button on the top left that says screen share, though.
There we go. We're looking at you now.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So the Ansel Keys fat research study, that kind of went off in the 50s, and that's what kind of started this whole cholesterol isn't good for you thing. And so when the study was published, it came out it came out like this. This is the data that they used, and this is what they showed to the public.
Right.
But behind the scenes, it looks like this was the data.
Those are from two. Those are from two different studies, by the way. And Ansel
they are?
Keys, he actually wrote a paper on why he didn't include certain countries. Like Mexico was one of the big outliers.
Okay, yeah, Mexico's right down here.
Mexico at the time, they didn't actually keep accurate mortality statistics, and I think even still to this day they don't.
I can believe
Ansel
that.
Ansel Keys left out some countries because they didn't have accurate mortality data. So I know, like I've been through this topic a million times. I know a lot of these low carb, like cholesterol guys. They try to claim that Ansel Keys deliberately left out certain countries. He did, but there was actually a valid reason behind it. He didn't just say, "Oh well, these countries are outliers. I'll just throw them out." He actually, in his paper, he explained why. So like Mexico, for instance, they didn't keep accurate mortality data. That's basically the general reason why he left out a lot of these other countries. They just didn't keep accurate mortality data.
Okay, so I can believe I believe that like Mexico, yeah, that could be pretty iffy, but we have right here number 8, and that's France.
Yep.
And they're a pretty modern country. I would figure they would be keeping good data.
They even to this day, they do have issues with underreporting cardiovascular events, cardiovascular mortality events. And actually, there's this thing called the French paradox, which, it started from this data set. If you actually account for underreporting of like ischemic heart disease mortality, it actually fits the line of data.
Okay. So okay,
But
so
still, like I
yeah,
want like if you can bring it up again, like if you actually
yeah,
look at the chart, there is still a pretty clear trend upwards. Like there's outliers here and there, but you can still
yeah.
see a pretty clear trend upwards. Also, in that data, Ansel Keys didn't actually account for different types of fat back then. It wasn't just saturated fat; it was total
Yeah, this is
fat.
just fat. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's another issue.
Yeah.
Recently, the American Heart Association, they released a report where, based on randomized controlled trials, they found that reducing saturated fat and replacing it with poly and monounsaturated fat has a protective effect for heart health. So if you're not going to account for that, that would also affect the data there. Also, your researchers Yerashami and Hillebo, they did a few modifications to Keyes's research, and they found that animal protein intake more strongly correlated with heart disease than did total fat.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so all right, so kind of like looking at this and even okay, so let's just say we're looking, at this graph right here.
Okay.
Um I want to know why, 20% of the population, died of heart disease and the other didn't, and when
Oh,
we
you
look
mean
at,
like Japan compared to the United States or something?
well, actually when we're looking at this, it looks like the more cholesterol. What's his age? All right, let's just look at
Well,
this line. All right.
That's that's fat calories. I also just want to clarify something. So
Okay.
the debate is structured around whether or not elevated serum cholesterol causes heart disease. This
Okay.
is a little bit besides the point. Like it's on track, but it's a little bit besides the point. Fat intake, like especially saturated fat intake, it can correlate to elevated serum cholesterol levels, but it's not exactly the same thing. You can find people with really high intakes of saturated fat and cholesterol, especially if you look at like hunter-gatherer
Yeah.
populations. They don't necessarily have elevated serum cholesterol.
Yeah.
So
And I
diet
can
and
show you.
actual elevation of cholesterol are two different things. We can kind of discuss this, but
Yeah.
I just want to kind of make sure the debate kind of stays on track with the topic, because I saw a video you made where
Hmm.
you're trying to claim that elevated serum cholesterol is not a risk factor for heart disease. Um, Diet does obviously impact serum cholesterol. I think you've admitted this. We can talk about how like
Yeah.
saturated fat and cholesterol impacts heart disease risk, but it's still a little bit besides the point. I'd rather see data from you where
Okay.
it shows people who have elevated serum cholesterol are not at higher risk of heart disease.
Okay. Well, actually, I agree with you on this. If you have higher, like,
Okay, you cut off.
we're
You might want to
eating,
start off. Sorry, you're really breaking up really bad. If you could start off again.
I
Okay, you're really cutting off. Maybe you want to try to turn off your webcam for just a moment. See if that helps.
what was that?
You were breaking up really, really bad. Could you just start from where you left off?
So okay, so I was doing more research into this, and it does show that if you have high.
Okay, you're breaking up again. If you could maybe turn off your camera. Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but you're really
Heart
breaking
disease
up.
and
Like,
atherosclerosis.
can you hear me? You might want to even try reconnecting because you're just breaking up really bad.
Yeah, we got to. I got all my stuff off.
Okay, now we
Is it
can hear
working
you.
now?
Yeah,
Okay.
it appears to be fine.
All right. So when I was digging into this more, it does show that if you have higher levels of LDL, you're at a higher risk for getting atherosclerosis or some sort of heart disease.
Okay.
And so that surprised me. And so I was like, okay. And so I started looking into it more. And when there's high levels of LDL in the blood, that means there's a lot of things broken in the body, and the body is sending out more cholesterol to do repairs. That tends to that is what it looks like is happening in the body based off the research I've been doing.
Okay, well, it's like the elevation in LDL cholesterol from either saturated fat or cholesterol is extraordinarily predictable, and that just independently raises cholesterol in your body. Sure, like I'll agree that certain confounding factors like obesity, inflammatory issues, that can accelerate atherosclerosis, like cigarette smoking is a huge one. But saturated fat and cholesterol itself raises serum cholesterol, and that's independent of any other kind of issues you could suggest to possibly raise cholesterol in the blood, like some sort of inflammatory condition. So I don't like, what do you mean cholesterol elevating in response to some sort of damage or broken system in the body?
Okay, so
Okay, you're breaking up again. Maybe just try doing this with your webcam turned off. I don't think it would be too big of a deal.
before,
I'm pretty sure you'd still be able to screen share if you wanted to.
shit. I'm gonna.
Do you want to just try reconnecting? Because sometimes that fixes it. Okay, so I think he's gonna try to reconnect right now. We'll just give him a second.
All right, I don't know what that's all about.
Okay. Well, it sounds fine right now.
Okay, good. So, all right, we were talking about what is this inflammation? What is this damage in the body?
So I'm a little bit confused about your position,
Okay.
because on the one hand, it sounds like you're trying to suggest that added saturated fat and cholesterol doesn't raise serum cholesterol, which is contrary to a point you made in your video response to me, where you
Yes.
said, "Oh yeah,
Yes.
sure it does." And now it sounds like you're saying, "Okay, well, saturated fat and cholesterol only elevate serum cholesterol when there's some sort of broken mechanism in your body." Could
Yes.
you actually explain that?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me explain that. Um. All right. So, where are we looking at? All right. So the first kind of guy to like look at atherosclerosis like under a microscope was Rudolf uh, Virchow, and he noticed that these tissues were inflamed.
Okay.
And the only reason something becomes inflamed in the body is if it is becomes damaged. Like if we go work out at the gym, our arm is going to become inflamed to deal with stress and to heal from that stress, heal the damage from that stress. So there's something damaging the arteries. We're not exactly sure what it is, but something is damaging the arteries.
Okay.
And I've speculated a few things that could be causing that damage. There's a couple cool theories out there, and it sounds like the popular theory, by the American Heart Association, is that extra cholesterol in the blood is causing this damage. Which
Okay. I'd
I
agree with that.
you would agree with that. So my stance on that is that LDL is trying to heal that damaged tissue.
Okay. So there are two ways I can actually disprove some of this.
Okay.
So, first of all, added dietary cholesterol increases the susceptibility of LDL to oxidative modification. I'll bring up a study right here. I'll see if I can use screen share.
Yeah, just hit that green. It's the green button on the left. There you go.
Okay, so consumption of saturated fat, or sorry, this is the wrong one. Consumption of eggs with meals increases the susceptibility of human plasma and low-density lipoprotein to lipid peroxidation. So basically, what they did in the study was they introduced an oxidizer to the serum, and they fed people a high egg diet or no eggs, or sorry, consumption of 2 eggs per day with meals for 3 weeks. Basically, what ended up happening was the people who ate no eggs, their LDL was less susceptible to oxidation. But the people who ate eggs, their LDL became more susceptible to oxidation. Also, you can find studies like this. Consumption of saturated fat impairs the anti-inflammatory properties of high-density lipoproteins and endothelial cell function. So saturated fat not only just prevents high-density lipoproteins, so basically the good cholesterol, from doing a good job with its anti-inflammatory properties, and it also damages endothelial cells. So you mentioned before, okay, well, cholesterol is here to prevent the damage that's occurring. Well, saturated fat is clearly causing the damage. This is also a really interesting study. So effects of dietary fat saturation on LDL oxidation and monocyte adhesion to human endothelial cells in vitro. So what they did here was they fed people a diet rich in saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fat. And what they found was people who ate a diet high in saturated fat, when they introduced this blood into a petri dish filled with human endothelial cells, there was greater monocyte adhesion to the endothelial cells. So monocytes are basically immune cells in the body. They fight things that are seen as foreign invaders, that are inflammatory. So given that there's greater monocyte adhesion when you compare saturated fat with monounsaturated fats, that's more evidence that saturated fats are pro-inflammatory. Monocyte adhesion is also a big factor for the progression of atherosclerosis. Monocytes basically glob onto these, cholesterol particles in your arteries, and then they become foam cells and expand. So this is a big part of the process in atherosclerosis. And let me see where my notes are. I had another. Oh, here we are. So nutrient signaling, evolutionary origins of the immune modulating effects of dietary fat. So what they found in this paper was that saturated fat is pro-inflammatory. So your body basically creates this inflammatory response to saturated fat because saturated fat promotes harmful gut microbes. And in contrast, there's an anti-inflammatory response with poly and monounsaturated fats, which have an antimicrobial effect.
Okay.
So all this data together, I think it clearly shows that if you are going to claim that, well, cholesterol is only there to basically heal and repair or something, it's sort of like an immune response. Okay, well, saturated fat is definitely causing that immune response. And also, if you actually look at data on cholesterol itself, let me just bring up a few things here. So I'll just turn screen share on again.
Okay, let's see
So
it.
optimal low-density lipoprotein is 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter. Lower is better and physiologically normal. What's also important to note here is this was co-authored by Lauren Cordain. So he's the big paleo guy.
Mhm.
He he's a little crazy, I'd say.
Mhm.
He like in some interviews he'll say, "Oh well, you should eat like a 70% plant-based diet," but then on the other hand, he'll claim, "Oh, you can eat as much saturated fat as you want." And he wrote this paper. So if you actually look at this paper, basically they determined that the optimal range for LDL cholesterol is 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter,
Mhm.
and they came to that number based on converging lines of data. So if you go down here, if you look at hunter-gatherer cultures, you have the Hadza, Inuit, Ikung, Pygmy, and the San. Their
Mhm.
total cholesterol levels are between about 110 to 115. Inuit are a little bit outliers here because they eat a very, very high saturated fat
Yeah,
diet.
it's like
And
80%.
yeah, and their caloric intake is a little higher than these other groups as well. Also, if you look at other wild primates, again, for the most part, their LDL cholesterol is around 110 for total cholesterol.
Mhm.
And other wild mammals, most of them, again, it's around 110 or lower. Horses are the only outliers here. And if you look at adult Americans, their cholesterol is way out here
Yeah,
at
that's really high.
209.
Yeah.
So they came to
That
the
tells me that the American has the most damage in their body.
Okay, so you could claim that. We'll just keep going here. Also, based on randomized controlled trials for LDL lowering medication, they
Mhm.
also found that atherosclerosis does not progress once you can get LDL cholesterol below 70 milligrams per deciliter. So, multiple converging lines of data suggest that the healthy normal physiological range for LDL cholesterol is
Mhm.
50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter. Now, what I'd consider the absolute nail in the coffin, your theory that, okay, well, cholesterol is only being elevated or it's only like an issue if it's elevated when there's some sort of damage that's going on. That idea has been pretty much being debunked with genetic research. So just give me a moment and I'll screen share again. So sequence variations in PCSK9, low LDL, and protection against coronary heart disease. So basically, there's gene mutations that affect the PCSK9 gene. It codes for a particular protein that binds to cholesterol receptors. Uh,
Okay.
Mutations in this gene can cause you to have abnormally low cholesterol levels. So among the white subjects examined, let me see here. Well, I can actually skip this. Okay? So wait, sorry. Of the 9,524 white subjects examined, they had a variation in the PCSK9 gene, which was associated with a 15% reduction in LDL cholesterol and a 47% reduction in the risk of coronary heart disease. So a 15% reduction in LDL resulted in a 40% reduction in coronary heart disease. And of the black subjects examined, so 3,363, what's also important to note is black people are particularly at risk for heart disease in the United
Mhm.
States because of multiple confounding factors. They smoke more, they tend to be more obese, they tend to have more stressful lifestyles, lower socioeconomic status. Well, they had PCSK9 gene mutations. These mutations were associated with a 28% reduction in mean LDL cholesterol and an 88% lower risk of coronary heart disease. Now, the full paper to this is free. There's a full free text. If you
Mhm.
read through of the black subjects examined, about one third smoked and about a third had hypertension. So, and quite a few also had diabetes. So they had multiple confounding risk factors for heart disease, but the 28% reduction in their LDL cholesterol resulted in an 88% reduced risk of coronary heart disease. So I'd say that's pretty much the nail in the coffin for that
Okay.
idea that cholesterol isn't an independent risk factor and it's only sort of an indirect risk factor.
Okay. So the one thing I was looking at is, all right, I'm going to share my screen now. Is what's LDL and HDL cholesterol. And when we look at it, where is this? So LDL and HDL like aren't cholesterol. They are carriers for cholesterol. So HDL and LDL are technically the same thing because all it is a car for the
Sort of.
cholesterol to get into.
I get the analogy. HDL
Mm-hmm.
brings cholesterol molecules back to the liver. LDL takes it out to other places in the body.
Mm-hmm. So we're claiming that cholesterol is clogging the arteries. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, cholesterol itself is its own independent risk factor.
Okay. So when we look at the actual composition of plaque, it's only
Right.
a very small percentage of it is cholesterol. So when we look at this is multiple samples of arterial plaque, and right here the main part of it, 65% of it is
Dense fibrous
fibrin.
tissue.
Yes, which is protein.
So I want to just make it clear here that it varies widely between individuals.
Mm-hmm.
It can be as low as 10%. It can be as high as 70%. But on an average basis, it takes up about 20 to 30% of the atheroma. Now, the fibrous tissue is probably just a result of, macrophages turning into foam cells and muscle tissue kind of trying to build a wall around there, and, your body kind of trying to create a dense structure around the LDL, or sorry, the atheroma.
Yeah, it's who knows what the body's doing. It's the body is wired to survive. Whatever we're giving it, whether it's garbage or health food, it's trying to make best do with what it's been handed.
Yeah, like I'm sure there's some sort of process that your body goes through that builds up these plaques a little bit further, but it's actually trying to repair something that it recognizes as damage.
Yes, and so one of the big factors in there's calcium deposits and
Yep.
coagulation, and a big part of coagulation is vitamin K2.
Right.
And so this is a really cool study that I found. So it's a big part of coagulating the blood and making scabs and making repairs and stuff like that. And it's also very important in utilizing calcium correctly. And this is a study that I found where they were giving rabbits they were giving them K2 pretty much because fermented cheese whey is very high in K2. They were giving them this cheese whey, and it was reversing their atherosclerosis. So K2 is a super important.
Could you go back to that for a second and
Yeah,
just go to let me just read the abstract.
let's go to their abstract. Okay, well, there's no abstract. There's a background. So they gave traditionally fermented cheese whey, which contains probiotics and has been used both as dairy food with ethnic flavor and a medicine for cardiovascular disease, especially regulating blood lipids among the Kazazi. I guess that's some human population somewhere. We therefore investigated its effects on rabbits and identified. Okay, so yeah. And so results after 4 weeks of this treatment, high and low dose whey decreased the serum of LDL cholesterol compared to their control group, and then it increased the HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol, compared to the controls. So giving the body the correct nutrients it needs is a really important aspect when it comes to cholesterol. How much cholesterol you're getting is a factor, but these other vitamins are also a very important factor because you can have cholesterol, like you can have, like if you're building a brick wall, like if you can have bricks and you can start making a wall, but if you don't have the motor, I mean, it turns into a mess pretty fast. And this is what happens to a lot of people. I guess we can call the bricks cholesterol, and then we don't have all these complementary nutrients like K2 to kind of bring everything together. And when we look to nature, cholesterol tells us.
Okay, wait. Could I actually stop you there? Because I see
All
a
right.
problem with the study you referenced.
All right, what's up?
I'm going to screen share again. So here, atherosclerotic rabbits were induced. Atherosclerotic rabbits were induced by administration of atherosclerotic. I think that's a little bit of a typo there. But basically, atherosclerosis was induced in rabbits by administration of an atherosclerotic diet for 12 weeks. I'm going to assume this is a diet high in saturated fat and cholesterol. That's just standard for inducing. Yeah. So, and they were divided randomly into 3 groups and treated for 4 weeks with simvastatin, 20 milligrams per kilogram, or TFCW. Okay, so that's
the way.
Okay, so they were given a cholesterol lowering medication, and
this was 4 separate groups. They had a control group, they had a statin group, they had a low dose, and then a high dose way. So there's 4 different rabbit groups.
Okay, and all drugs were intragastrical, administered once daily, body weight, lipid profile, C-reactive protein, vascular cell adhesion. So after 4 weeks of treatment, high and low dose of the cheese decreased serum total cholesterol, triglycerides, LDL-C, CRP, compared to atherosclerotic group, and increased HDL-C. Okay, well, you know what? I'd want to read the full paper because I'm not entirely sure. Like, if I had to guess, basically what they did was they induced atherosclerosis to begin with a diet that's high in saturated fat and cholesterol.
Yeah.
I don't know why that wouldn't worry you. Like, that would be an indication, okay, well, these foods cause atherosclerosis to begin with. And why wouldn't you avoid that in the first place? And there are other ways of getting vitamin K2. I mean, natto is a much higher source of vitamin K2 than fermented cheese. Also, the human research on K2 is really mixed. So far, positive research has only come out of the Netherlands, I believe, but in Germany, there's actually a relationship with a higher risk of heart disease with vitamin K2 intake. And it's probably just because of a number of confounding factors with the diet. Maybe there's a certain range where, given a certain saturated fat and cholesterol intake, you can find a benefit to eating, certain high K2 foods like cheeses. But the cheese itself is actually inducing the atherosclerosis to begin with, and you're just introducing another confounding factor like the K2, which seems to have a protective effect, but the cheese itself is actually causing the atherosclerosis to begin with. So again, I'd say overall, this paper you linked, like, it's not even human research to begin with. I'd like to see actual real world population data where this actually works. And so far that evidence is really mixed. So you can't really say, okay, well, if you eat cheese, it'll protect you from heart disease just because of this one rabbit study. So far, the human data is really mixed. And like, the atherogenic diet is high in saturated fat and cholesterol. So I don't know why you'd use a study where they used high saturated fat and cholesterol foods to induce atherosclerosis and claim high saturated fat and cholesterol foods don't cause atherosclerosis. So that sounds contradictory to me, but you can go on.
Okay. All right. Let's look at this next thing. So this is a big chart. Crap, I want to send you this link. But so anyways, this is a big chart where they're inducing atherosclerosis and like other heart diseases with diet. And
I think I saw the study you're talking about.
Yes,
in the video.
I understand it better now. So here, this strain right here, they are genetically modifying the rats somehow. I don't know how they do it, but they're genetically modifying them so that they have genes that impairs their fat metabolism. So it makes them worse at metabolizing fat.
Yeah, that's pretty standard practice. It normally
Okay.
takes like several months or even years to induce atherosclerosis in certain animals. So what they
Okay.
do is they just modify certain genes to make the process go a little bit quicker.
Yep.
And then from there, they try to look at how atherosclerosis progresses in these animals, and then they try to draw parallels to how it progresses in humans. Generally, this research is done for drug treatments. So basically, they'll induce rats with atherosclerosis. They don't really care how their genes function. And then they try to like create drugs that either lower cholesterol, modify HDL, or something like that
Yeah.
to see if that reduces their atherosclerosis. And then from there, they go on to human trials. Could you actually go to the very, very top of the paper? Because this paper doesn't, I don't think it really means
So
like it's not meant for what you think it's meant for.
so the top of the paper is explaining the strains.
Well, no, they actually talk about how these animal models of atherosclerosis are different from human models. So then they go into details about why they're different.
Well, it's
I
because rats metabolize cholesterol better than us.
Yeah, okay,
That's pretty much what it's explaining up here, and then this part explains like what the different gene things they were doing.
okay,
So, but the point I want to point out here is, so here we have the Western diet, which is, so this is the Western diet. This is a normal chow diet, and so I'm assuming this diet is very low and is low in cholesterol. They're just feeding them like rat pellets or something like that.
I'm not entirely sure. I know with certain rat foods, because we
Hmm.
have mice, a lot of the mouse food is the same as rat food. I know they add things like bone meal and shit to rat
Hmm.
food a lot of the time, and sometimes it's really just cat food. So I'm
Yeah,
not entirely sure what the standard chow is. You'd have to actually look at that. Um,
but
but
I would say that, so this PD stands for Prague diet, pagan diet, or something like that.
okay, pagan
This
diet. I
I
don't
tried
even
to
know what that
Google
is.
what the hell this thing was, and all you get is a diet very, very, very high in cholesterol.
Okay.
So this is very high in cholesterol. This is in the middle of the road, and this is lower. And
Okay.
so
Sure.
they're all coming down, whether it's high, low, or in the middle of the road. They are all coming down with some sort of heart disease or some sort of atherosclerosis.
Okay. What's your point?
So that tells us that whether the diet is high or low in cholesterol, you're going to get atherosclerosis. So there's something else missing. There's something we're missing to this equation than
Okay.
just cholesterol. There's something else.
I'd say no. Rodents are extraordinarily susceptible to heart disease to begin with. The mice we had three mice. Two of them have died from heart disease already. That's just a normal thing for them. They're extraordinarily, like, we even talked to our vet about it. She said they generally only live to about a year or two because they'll just die of congestive heart failure. So I don't see these animal studies being related at all to human
So you
research.
think
And
it's normal for
yeah, right.
animals to just die
No, no, like not
of
just animals
random
in
disease?
general, not animals in general necessarily. I'm just telling you rodents in particular, especially if we're talking about just rodents that are being bred in captivity. I don't know about how wild rodents do, but I just know they're at extraordinarily high risk of like ischemic heart disease to begin with,
Hmm.
which is why they use them in studies like this to begin with, because it's so fucking easy to induce heart disease in these animals.
Hmm.
And they even go a step further by modifying their genes to make them even more susceptible. So I'll actually give you some contradictory research here.
Okay.
Okay, oh shit,
Inception.
fuck, I shared the wrong one. Okay, so this is a study that was pretty recent, December 2017, Journal of the American College of Cardiology. So normal LDL cholesterol levels are associated with subclinical atherosclerosis in the absence of risk factors. So what they did here was you can read the methods, but basically they filtered out participants that smoked, that had a total cholesterol score above 240 milligrams per deciliter, low density lipoprotein cholesterol, so LDLC, above 160 milligrams per deciliter, high density lipoprotein cholesterol, less than or equal to 40 milligrams per deciliter. And basically, they just found people who didn't have any other, or sorry, actually didn't have any known cardiovascular risk factors. So they looked at their LDL cholesterol scores. And this pretty much perfectly coincides with the data from the Lauren Cordain study I mentioned earlier. So if you look at the group here, so this is all LDLC values. So 50 to 60 milligrams per deciliter, 100% of the patients had no atherosclerosis. Now you get to 60 to 70, 90% of the patients had no atherosclerosis, but 10% did, but they're intermediate 2 to 3 sites, nothing serious. Then you go up 70 to 80, you see the lesions, you see an increasing number of people with atherosclerotic lesions, and the lesions gradually become more and more complex. 80 to 90, you see increased rates. 90 to 100, it's pretty much the same here, but then you get to 110, and you see it goes up and up and up. So this is all considered from basically, well, no, actually from here to here, this is considered normal, and below is considered, so yeah, around 90 to 100, that's basically the American average. So, you know, generally if you get a blood test, they'll tell you, oh, well, your LDL you should try to get your LDL below 100. So this is considered normal, and you see lesions progressing. And as you get higher and higher, you see more and more people with atherosclerotic lesions, and they become more and more complex. It's not until you get to 50 to 60 milligrams per deciliter where you see that not occurring at all. So there are confounding factors here. Now, the reason, you know, some people, like there's only, I don't know, like 50%, let's say, who have atherosclerosis in like the 100 to 110 group, you know, like maybe some of these people have, you know, confounding lifestyle factors or genetic risk factors that make them a little higher risk than these people. But you do see a very consistent trend where if you do have elevated serum cholesterol, it's associated with severity of atherosclerosis. This is subclinical levels of atherosclerosis, by the way. So it hasn't reached to the point where you get angina, you know, congestion, heart pains, you're at risk of heart attack. But you do see a very clear trend where as cholesterol increases, you see levels of atherosclerosis increase. Now, you also have to consider these people didn't have any known cardiovascular disease risk factors, so they're generally healthy people, don't smoke. When you get into like the standard American population, okay, they're overweight, they smoke, they eat like shit, you see atherosclerosis rates increase to the point where it's clinically significant. But even on a subclinical level, you see very, very obviously the cholesterol itself is a risk factor here for atherosclerosis.
All right, so right now what you're saying is when the levels of cholesterol are high in the blood, there's a huge risk factor for developing some sort of heart disease.
Yes, and
I agree with you on that.
That comes from converging lines of data. So if you look at hunter-gatherer populations, they all tend to have very low cholesterol levels. The people who have 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter, they avoid heart disease. Animals, like, you know, other primates, they avoid heart disease. They have low cholesterol levels, 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter, based on randomized trials with drug treatments. If you can get your cholesterol score below 70 milligrams per deciliter, you avoid heart disease. Even in subclinical atherosclerosis, you don't see any atherosclerosis in people who have cholesterol scores in 50 to 60 milligram per deciliter range. And even when other risk factors are absent, so no smoking, generally overall healthy lifestyle, you do see increasing rates of atherosclerosis in people with high cholesterol scores, absent of pretty much any obvious risk factors like smoking.
So the issue I'm seeing with looking at, so I'm already agreeing with you that if there's high cholesterol in the blood, you're at a greater risk factor. I'm already agreeing with you with that.
Okay.
So what I am trying to shed light on is whether cholesterol in the diet is causing this spike in the blood.
Okay, so that's what you're actually wondering now?
No, well, I know. I'm getting to that.
Okay.
So okay, so kind of like where we're getting a lot of this dietary information is from the American Heart Association. We're getting a lot of,
what do you mean by this dietary information?
like this, like the big pusher behind you should eat a low cholesterol diet because it'll protect you against not getting atherosclerosis or some sort of heart disease.
The recommendation for that is based on the fact that dietary cholesterol increases serum cholesterol, and serum cholesterol has been unequivocally linked to risk of heart disease.
Okay, so all right, so the first thing I'm going to point out is, so we have the American Heart Association here, and they're giving us this advice. And I totally understand where, you eat cholesterol, it raises your cholesterol in your blood. You shouldn't eat cholesterol. That makes sense. But these guys, I mean, they're just not they're pretty dishonest. They're putting their stamp of approval on foods like Trix, Cocoa Puffs, and Lucky Charms, and Cinnamon Toast Crunch. They're putting their stamp of approval on garbage food.
You can have whatever problems you have with the organization. Like, I'm not saying everything they do is like justified. I'm sure they're doing that because of industry pressure. But that doesn't make the point.
Right, though. And then we hear they're running deals with Monsanto. So we have to be skeptical of these guys.
The point. Like, again, you're trying to like kind of defame like a certain organization. It's besides the point. Oh, like, okay, well, the American Heart Association, they're assholes, they're cunts. Okay, well, that doesn't have anything to do with whether or not elevated serum cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease, which you've already agreed with now. Now, basically, I'm going to show whether or not. Right now, I think the discussion is going to move to whether or not added dietary cholesterol or serum cholesterol increase, added dietary cholesterol or saturated fat increase serum cholesterol levels.
So when we look at risk factors like this, we can also say that everyone that drinks water is going to get atherosclerosis, because 100% of atherosclerosis patients are drinking water. So therefore, water must be a big factor. We have to understand
that's a false analogy.
Causing.
No, that's a false analogy. Like, look, I just gave you a paper that's very recent from just last year, where they found that normal cholesterol levels, absent of any other like apparent risk factors like smoking, hypertension, diabetes, it's associated with increasing severity of atherosclerosis. And it's not until you get down to very low levels, 50 to 60 milligrams per deciliter, where you don't see any atherosclerosis. So I don't know where you're coming up with this analogy that,
I just don't understand how cholesterol couldn't be good for you. I mean, all your organs are high in cholesterol. They need this cholesterol to function correctly.
Okay,
there's something damaging the arteries.
Listen, I'll debunk this right away. Is vitamin A good for you? Is iron good for you? Is vitamin D good for you?
Retinol is good. Okay. There's a reason why it is the first vitamin
is there such a thing? Is there such a thing as acute toxicity?
Not really. You have to have an absurd amount. You have to eat polar bear liver.
You're saying there isn't a super physiological amount that you could ingest and it circulating in your serum that could cause adverse health consequences and even kill you? Because you can die from hypervitaminosis.
Okay, you can die from drinking too much water. You can die from eating too many vegetables.
So you agree there's a healthy range for certain things.
Yes, but
right. So if you have elevated,
dangerously low right now, and
sorry, repeat that again.
Americans are dangerously low in vitamins in general, and that's
Okay.
why we're leading the world in deaths from various diseases.
You think it's only because they're dangerously low in vitamins. It's not because they're eating a very processed diet that's high in saturated fat, cholesterol. A lot of them are obese, sedentary. It's just the vitamins.
No, so disease is only caused by 3 or 4 different things. There's malnutrition,
Okay.
infection, and then there's like physical trauma diseases.
Well,
Those are the
define
only three. Malnutrition,
define it.
define it. So the healthiest populations I've seen are the people referenced in Weston A. Price's book. They were eating, they were eating the most nutrient dense diet possible, and they were preparing these foods so that they were easy to digest, because you waste a ton of materials digesting food if it isn't cooked and fermented and prepared correctly. It's
Okay.
like a business where, if you have your inputs and you want to make money on your outputs, we're trying to run this machine, this business, as efficiently as possible.
Okay.
And when you start losing money and you go bankrupt, when you're starting to near bankruptcy, that is when disease and other things start to show up. Mother Nature is a ruthless accountant.
Okay. You don't think it's possible that you can eat too much of a particular nutrient and that can increase disease risk?
So 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 when I help people heal from gut disease and stuff, I always emphasize the importance of taking natural supplements, because you can take a ton of synthetic retinol, a ton of synthetic vitamin A, and that's going to cause issues. But if you eat it with liver, it comes with all the other different complementary vitamins and minerals so that your body
Okay.
can utilize it.
There are a lot of case reports of people suffering from acute hypervitaminaosis from eating fish liver. That's very common, especially in China. There's a lot of case reports.
So where this thing became popular is these Arctic explorers would go up and they would get stranded, and then
Sure.
they would shoot polar bear, and then they would eat polar bear liver.
Okay. I know what you're going to suggest here. There's actually there's anthropological data I've seen too, where early hunters, I think it was like an Australopithecus specimen, they
Hmm.
didn't know not to eat carnivores because they have such an insanely high content of vitamin A,
Yeah,
where you'd get hypervitaminaosis.
I mean it's
But
like
I'm talking about fish. I know fish can be carnivores, but there are a lot of case reports of people eating fish liver and getting hypervitaminaosis. So
a lot of that's
you can't.
happening with people taking the fish liver oil
This was
instead of
just fish.
eating the liver, just the liver.
Okay, fair enough. I have seen quite a lot of case reports out of China where people were eating just fish liver, and like for some reason it's seen as like a local remedy for some sort of problem,
Hmm.
and they suffered acute vitamin A toxicity.
Well,
So it can happen.
yeah. I mean, you can overdose on anything, but
Okay, sure. But my point is, you don't think it's possible to eat too much of something, too much saturated fat, too much cholesterol.
okay. Yeah, you can eat too much of something, but
Okay.
so let's. So we're going to talk about the Eskimos. They had, I mean, it's safe to say that their dietary fat from saturated fat, their calorie intake was around like 70 or 80%. It was really high.
Sure.
So why now? Why did they have very, very low rates of atherosclerosis
They didn't. They had
when they
about the
were on
same
their
rate of.
primitive diet, when they were on their traditional diet?
No, they didn't. They had about the same rates as Americans at the time. Like yeah, in the 50s and 60s, they had about the same rates of atherosclerosis as Americans at the time. And also, researchers like Ansel Keys, they suspected that their heart disease rates were in fact higher. It's just that it's hard to detect because they're small populations spread out across a wide area, so they're kind of hard to study.
Yeah. So I came across many, many accounts of them having great heart health, even though they were eating tons and
Yeah.
tons of fat.
Okay, so did they do things like angiograms, what's it called? Intermediate thickness tests with ultrasound, things like that?
I mean, no, they didn't bring that equipment up there, but they
Okay,
weren't.
so they just assumed, right? That's the problem with this early research. They just assumed they had good heart health.
All right. So, all right, I'm going to go through this. So, in 1962, three British doctors went through and they tested the enzyme levels of the blood.
Okay,
And
like what enzymes?
just enzymes and like fat enzymes. And they found that when the
Mhm.
enzyme levels were high, the arteries were clear, and when the enzyme levels were low, the arteries were hardened. And
Okay, so they had to have had some sort of ultrasound device, or like they had to have had something like that to actually determine whether or not their arteries were hard.
so so the so the word Eskimo means to eat it raw.
Yeah, I know.
So these people were eating raw foods, which meant they were eating lots and lots of enzymes. Your digestive system absorbs enzymes and it helps, and this takes the burden of digestion off your body.
You're saying eating raw meat takes the burden of digestion off your body.
So
Are
that's
you
kind of
actually suggesting that?
so that's a double-edged sword right there. So if you're eating, so we're actually eating, all right, so if we look at your average ground beef in the store,
Okay.
they actually had, that's actually like somewhat fermented ground beef. If you were to go out into the field and whack a cow over the head and cook it that day, or eat it raw, or even eat it raw right there, you would have a very hard time digesting that piece of meat. And so what they do is they let it hang and break down in its own enzyme. So that's less digestion you have to do.
Okay.
And and what you see like a lot of these carnivore diets do is that they're eating tons and tons of meat, but it's cooked. You know,
Okay.
if they want to do it right, they need to copy what the Eskimos were doing, because if the Eskimos would have cooked all their food, they would have had a lot of issues.
Okay, well, they had the same rates of heart disease at the time as the Americans when they were studied in like the 1950s and 60s. So I wouldn't say they're exactly doing anything right. And as they move to a more standard American diet, their rates of death from ischemic heart disease have actually declined. Now, you could argue to some extent that might be because of modernization there, like just access to better
Yeah.
medical treatment. But they still have very high rates of ischemic heart disease. And look, this is besides the point. Like, I've already demonstrated that hunter-gatherer populations who have low cholesterol levels that are considered within the healthy physiological range,
Hmm.
which is 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter. And again, like that's from converging lines of data where we can actually determine the healthy normal physiological range is 50 to 70. Um,
Right,
so we
so
already
I
know.
actually have a recent study right here
Well,
where
no, no,
where
no,
this
listen.
guy was actually
Well, let me finish.
measuring the
Let me finish.
LDL.
I'll let
All
you
right.
go on. So we already know what the healthy normal physiological range for LDL cholesterol is. Looking at like the Inuit and suggesting that
We
they
don't
have
know if
low
that's
rates.
healthy. We
Well,
just
no,
know it
listen.
won't induce atherosclerosis. We
Well,
don't know
no,
if they're getting
listen.
other diseases.
Well, listen. Assuming
They
like
probably
you're
are.
basically, well, listen. You're saying that the Inuit are eating a diet high in saturated fat and cholesterol,
Yes.
and for some reason they have low rates of heart disease.
Hmm.
Well, that's kind of besides the point of the actual debate. Again, we're looking at whether or not elevated serum cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease. And
Hmm.
you already agreed with me that elevated serum cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease. So right now, the discussion should focus around whether or not saturated fat and cholesterol elevate serum cholesterol. So
Okay, I can talk about that.
right here, here's a really great meta-analysis by Paul
I
N.
say that it
Hopkins.
does and it doesn't, and I'm going to
Well,
explain
I'll
the fact that
actually
it does.
agree
But
with
yeah,
that.
let's go about this. Let's go
I'll
about stuff.
actually agree with that to some extent. So if you actually read through this meta-analysis, basically they created an equation where they kept in mind a baseline dietary cholesterol along with added dietary cholesterol. And when you plug these numbers in, it creates a hyperbolic curve. So if you start with a cholesterol intake of 0, the expected change in your serum cholesterol will be about 10 to 15%. which isn't insignificant because, again, when we were looking at the genetic studies on the PCSK9 mutations, a 15% reduction in serum cholesterol corresponded with a 48% reduction in coronary heart disease. So if you can bring your cholesterol intake down to zero, theoretically, that could reduce your cholesterol by about 10 or 15%. Also, if you go through this paper a little bit more, they talk about how certain populations are a little more sensitive to added dietary cholesterol. And that's likely because your body makes some more longer term adaptations for cholesterol intake. So if you were to conduct a metabolic ward experiment where you had a washout period for maybe 2 weeks, where you told people not to eat any cholesterol, well, when they introduce cholesterol back into their diet, you'll see about a 10 to 15% increase. But if you find populations who almost never consume cholesterol and you add cholesterol to their diet, you'll see around a 25 or 30% increase. So this, again, this meta-analysis, it just conclusively proves that added dietary cholesterol certainly does increase serum cholesterol. The one caveat to this is once your dietary cholesterol intake is around 400 to 500 milligrams per deciliter, so dietary intake, so you're eating about 2 eggs a day, you won't see any more change to your cholesterol score if any more cholesterol is added on top of your diet. And that's where you see a lot of these other metabolic ward experiments or randomized trials fail. They don't actually take into account baseline cholesterol. So they get a bunch of participants who are eating, 300-400 milligrams of cholesterol at the beginning of the study. Then they add more cholesterol to their diet, and then they don't see any change. And then they falsely report that, oh, look, added dietary cholesterol doesn't cause a change in serum cholesterol. Well, no. If you actually have them eat a zero cholesterol diet, and then you add more cholesterol to their diet, you'll generally see a 10 to 15% increase. And it might even be more if you haven't eaten any cholesterol for an extended period of time. Also, just one more meta-analysis I want to show you,
Okay.
and I'll let you continue.
Well, so it's
I'll
safe
let
to
you continue.
assume that
Just
all
a
this
second.
cholesterol is cooked. All this fat is being cooked.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
In certain studies, they use I think they use scrambled eggs. Sometimes they use eggs that are cooked easy, not very well done. But you can you can look at the research they rely on and
I
see
mean, if they're using things like butter, it's always pasteurized butter or pasteurized cream.
Okay, sure. So
they're not eating raw stuff.
Okay, so dietary lipids and blood cholesterol, quantitative meta-analysis of metabolic ward studies. So this is just another huge meta-analysis. What they did here was they took 395 dietary experiments, all metabolic ward research, and they found in typical British diets replacing 60% of saturated fats by other fats and avoiding dietary cholesterol. That would be expected to reduce serum cholesterol by 10 to 15%. And again, that's not an insignificant number. Like a 15% reduction corresponds with 48% reduced risk.
I want to find the 100% reduction. What the factor is for 100% reduction.
Oh, well, in the genetic study I linked, I'll bring it up again. Just give me a second. And by the way, a 100% reduction doesn't actually mean zero risk. It just means you're reducing it by 100%. So it doesn't mean there's no heart disease. It just means it's basically...
Yeah, I want to find the factors that make it so...
Well, give me
it's almost impossible for me to get atherosclerosis or for you to get atherosclerosis. That's what I want to look for.
Well, I'll actually show you. So here, if we just go back to the study, people who had a cholesterol score of 50 to 60 milligrams per deciliter, absolutely zero atherosclerosis in these patients. So if you keep your cholesterol levels low enough, so below 70, pretty much impossible for you to develop atherosclerosis. And that's according to a very, very recent study from only a year ago. And again, if we look at
how long was that study for? Because when we were looking at those mice and rat studies or rabbit studies, whatever animal it was, they were getting atherosclerosis on a low cholesterol diet.
Okay, well, I believe this is cross-sectional. So they just took a cross-section of the population, measured their serum cholesterol, and then took a look at their the plaque in their arteries.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, they've been alive for a number of years. The mean age in this age group is 45, and
Mm-hmm.
it's assumed that they had this cholesterol score for a long period of time. So again, I'll just bring it up. If you look at the methods here, so the
Mm-hmm.
mean age, so 1,779 participants, mean age was 45, plus or minus 4.1 years, 50.3% were women. So it's assumed that these people had this cholesterol score for a long period of time. I wouldn't really think that, oh, suddenly these people here, they normally have a LDL cholesterol of like 150, but just for the last few weeks when the study was conducted, it just dropped down. No, like you'd expect these cholesterol levels to be pretty consistent throughout their period of life, because generally people eat pretty consistently throughout their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a population that doesn't have any apparent cardiovascular risk factors. So again, these people are eating fairly healthy diets, basically fairly healthy diets, fairly consistent lifestyles. So you'd expect them to maintain this cholesterol score for a long period of time. And again, this is why I love these genetic studies. These people have reduced cholesterol due to their genes. So for a fact, since birth, they have had lower than normal cholesterol just because of their genes. And again, a 28% reduction in LDL cholesterol was associated with an 88% reduction in risk of coronary heart disease, so almost 100%. So if you reduce your cholesterol score by about 30%, there's a very good chance that you'll pretty much avoid heart disease, depending where you start off with.
There's still people dying of atherosclerosis and heart disease on low cholesterol diets. Like,
Yes, there is, but there's a difference between having a low cholesterol diet and having low serum cholesterol. So again, you can eat a low cholesterol diet, but eat a lot of saturated fat. So if you just eat a lot of coconut oil, that will raise your cholesterol, increase your risk of heart disease.
okay,
Also, there's genetic factors. You could eat a perfect fucking diet that should normally dramatically reduce your cholesterol, but just because you have shit genes, that can keep your cholesterol levels elevated, increase your risk of heart disease.
okay. So
And again,
say,
there's confounding factors to keep in mind too, like low B12 status, increased inflammation, smoking, things like that.
okay, so say we're eating a low cholesterol diet, but for some reason our blood cholesterol level is going up.
Sure.
That means there's something broken in the body. The body is trying to heal something.
Not well. Again, do you have any evidence that something that's inflammatory increases cholesterol? Like, do you have any evidence that smoking itself increases cholesterol? Something that's absolutely proven to increase risk of heart disease. And I also want to point out
I mean, that does
the
create damage in the body.
well, no, look, I agree with you, but I
Yeah.
also want to point out, if you do read the full text to the study, again, 1/3 of the Black subjects examined were
Mhm.
smokers. So 1/3 of the Black subjects smoked, but the Black subjects in the study, they had a mean reduction of 28% to their LDL cholesterol score, and that coincided with an 88% reduction in coronary heart disease risk, despite 1/3 of them smoking. So again, it's like, given that evidence, it's pretty clear that cholesterol is the central factor here. Everything else is just a confounding variable.
All right. So I'm going to share with you some data where a lot of populations were eating high cholesterol foods and animals as well, and they had low cholesterol scores. So
That can
this,
happen. Okay,
yeah.
I'll
Well,
like
I'm gonna show you what the factor is and whether it's high or low. And
okay.
it's the raw factor.
So
And
does the
so
study actually measure their cholesterol scores?
I think this one does. I don't know where the exact numbers are on it.
Okay, just
So what this one is saying is this guy was studying Greenland Eskimos who were out in the middle of nowhere living on their ancestral diet, eating everything or 90% of what they're eating raw. And they had a low cholesterol score compared to the Eskimos in Denmark. They had Eskimos in Denmark living a more modern way of life and more modern foods, and their cholesterol was a lot higher
Okay,
than
well,
these
what were their
guys.
actual cholesterol scores?
I don't know what their actual cholesterol scores were, but
Okay, let me see if I can actually get access to the full paper. I'm just looking on Sci-Hub to see. It's loading. Okay, so I do have access to the full paper. I'll actually screen share right now. Okay, so here's the paper you're talking about, fatty acid composition of the plasma lipids in Greenland Eskimos. I'm
okay.
just gonna skip to the table here. Composition of the Eskimo diet and average Danish food. Eskimos, more cholesterol, saturated fat. The Danes were actually eating more saturated fat. So that would actually explain why the Danish had more serum cholesterol. I also want to point out, like, you're talking about two groups of people, like one group living out in the wilderness, basically on their like ancestral lifestyle, not even just
Mm-hmm.
ancestral diet. And you're talking about people who like, and you're comparing them to people who are living in a more modern society. So it wouldn't surprise me that they just have easier access to calories in general, whatever foods they want.
Mm-hmm.
That would have a pretty substantial impact on their serum cholesterol score. And right here, biggest factor, you're talking about 34% of their fat coming from saturated fat for the Eskimos and 53% for the Danish. So that wouldn't surprise me. So going lower, we've got Greenland Eskimos living in Denmark. Mean values for plasma lipid and lipoprotein concentrations in Greenland Eskimos living in Denmark, and Caucasian Danes in Denmark. So total lipids, grams. Oh, okay, so cholesterol millimoles per liter, 5.85. Let me just quickly go to a website that would calculate this. So what was it? 5.58 millimoles per liter. Conversion to milligrams per deciliter. No. Okay, so I'll start 5.58, wasn't 5.58. Okay, so that's 215 milligrams per deciliter. So that's still well above the healthy, normal physiological range that we discussed. So again, if you just look at this paper, healthy range is 50 to
I
70
wouldn't
milligrams per
count
deciliter.
the
They're way,
average
way higher.
cholesterol level in the bloods of Americans like being a good marker for health, because Americans are the sickest country in the world just about right now. I mean, they're up there. You know,
Okay.
they are not good examples of radiant health.
Okay, sure. Neither are the
I would
Eskimos.
argue that the people that Weston A. Price was witnessing, these people who were so healthy, they had perfectly straight teeth, no cavities, and their languages didn't even have words for disease. They were so healthy.
Okay, well, just because you don't have words for disease doesn't mean disease didn't exist. I think
We
that's
didn't
a
develop
bad.
the language for disease until we started coming down with diseases.
Well, yes, but like, what populations are you talking about exactly? Like, I find it very hard to believe that native hunter-gatherers would never encounter disease when malaria has been the #1 killer of human beings for thousands of fucking years. You're telling me people didn't die of disease and never
No,
had disease?
no, they did, and they knew how to deal with
Yeah.
it. But they were so like when Weston A. Price was visiting these people who were on the ancestral diets, they were great, and then he would go visit someone that had just adopted a modern diet, and then everyone would be suffering from tuberculosis and all sorts of nasty diseases.
You're saying, okay, well, the reason people in more modern civilizations have more rates of tuberculosis, I have trouble pronouncing it, but it's just because they're living in more dense populations. In prison populations, you see higher rates of tuberculosis. Fuck it, because they're living
TB.
in very dense, cramped populations.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say, oh, well, the reason they're getting higher rates of TB is because they're not on an ancestral diet. That's just population size. Even in the if you look at the transition from hunter-gatherer to the Neolithic era, like Paleo to Neolithic, you see increased rates of disease and shit, and that's just because Neolithic, okay, well, you're starting farming, but you have closer proximity to farm animals, which transfer disease to humans, and on top of that, humans are living in more densely populated areas. So you have two big, huge risk factors for disease coming in. So I wouldn't say like higher rates of infectious disease. They correlate with not being on an ancestral diet, but the reason for that is they're just living in smaller, less dense populations. And
So are you saying that I don't? So are you saying that we don't need the nutrients? Like I feel like to me, it's you need X amount of this vitamin, that vitamin, that, but A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You need all these. You need X amount to be healthy. And when I say healthy, like disease free, do you think there's like a number for each of these? We don't have to be
okay,
exact, but like for a
okay.
car to run, it needs gas,
Are we
oil,
talking about
all
so are we
sorts of other
talking
stuff.
about vitamins and minerals specifically, or vitamins, minerals, macronutrients?
All of them, vitamins and
Okay,
minerals, though,
I would
particularly.
agree that there's, generally speaking, an ideal range. There's going to be variation between individuals because of things like absorption rates and physical activity, sure. But it's easy to come up with averages. So I would say there's an ideal average for intake of like iron, vitamin A, things like that. And I'd even say the same thing with macronutrients. There was the big Pure study that came out recently. They found the best macronutrient ratio for life expectancy was something like 55% of calories coming from carbohydrates, and I think it was like 30-ish% coming from fat. So and that coincides with other
Yeah,
research
yeah.
too.
So
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 I'd say
what?
there's a range that you could say this is generally ideal for most people.
So what Weston A. Price found is the macronutrients were all over the place. Some ate lots of fat, some ate lower amounts of fat. Some
Okay.
ate. The only thing that was kind of consistent was protein consumption. They had about around 20%, around 20%. No, none of them
For
went
all
above.
cultures?
Yes, for all
Like
cultures. None of
modern
their
and more
for the.
natural, like
I'm talking about the healthy populations.
okay, so the
But their
among the healthy
vitamin.
population, so sorry, just to be
Yeah, yeah,
clear,
yeah. Let's be clear.
among the healthy populations of people, so people on more ancestral diets,
Mm-hmm.
protein intake was pretty consistent, but carbohydrate and fat varied a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And but the vitamin content and the mineral content, he said it was sometimes 10 times higher. Um, on average, it was like 10 times higher than what the moderns were eating.
Okay.
And so,
Yeah, I could believe that for at least some things.
yeah, yeah. And so, I don't know. So when we get to atherosclerosis, what actually is very interesting about this is, have you heard of the Pottinger's cat study?
No.
So this is all right, I'm going to share this with you. So he was buddy buddy with Weston A. Price, and so he did a really cool experiment where is it? Okay, so he did a really cool experiment. So people were like donating bunches of cats for him. He was treating TB patients, tuberculosis patients, and so he had all these cats. I think he was doing like adrenal extracts to treat his patients or something like that. But so he had two groups of cats, and he would feed one group of cats raw meat and raw milk, and he fed the other groups of cats cooked meat and pasteurized milk. And what he found is the cooked group became so unhealthy they couldn't even reproduce anymore after a few generations, and they shed, they were nasty, and came down with all sorts of diseases. And he found that the raw food cats were tons and tons and tons healthier.
Okay.
They were getting the exact same nutrients. These foods were from the exact same animals. They were getting the exact same nutrients.
Okay, I will say that's an interesting finding, but they're cats. If
Hmm.
you actually look at data on raw food diets in humans, not even among raw vegans, so there's just raw foodists
Yeah,
who eat raw meat, raw milk, raw butter. Women tend to lose their periods at very young ages. They tend to have a below like healthy BMI.
and this
The
is on
data on
a
raw
what type
food,
of diet?
just
A
a
raw
raw food diet.
a raw.
So
When we say raw food,
just
are we?
raw food in general. So raw
There's a
meat,
big
raw
difference
milk, raw.
between like a raw carnivore and like a
I
raw
think this
vegan.
is
There's a huge
so.
difference.
Well, I understand that, but I'm
So are we talking
saying
about raw carnivore or like raw?
not even like raw carnivore, just raw foodists. So
Okay, all right.
that includes raw vegans and just raw foodists. So people who eat everything raw, including meat, dairy, eggs, and
Okay.
plants. So the data isn't very good. Like there isn't much research on humans because there aren't like very many raw foodists.
Yeah.
But the research that does exist, it's not very promising. Women lose their periods at a very young age, like in their 20s, and that's a huge risk factor for what is it, osteoporosis later in life. It's just not good to lose like reproductive ability when you're in your 20s.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, that's a sign of.
they also tend to be underweight as well. So uh, there isn't much data on raw food diets. Like I'm sure it's
So.
possible to do it right, but like if we're actually just looking at the data that does exist,
Hmm.
it there's no suggestion that eating a diet of completely raw foods is a good idea.
Okay, so one of the stories from the Eskimos, it's a really cool story. So they would travel around a lot with sled dogs and stuff like this.
Okay,
And so at first they were feeding them raw fish. They would kill fish and feed it to the dogs just like that.
sure.
And they would go on these journeys and the dogs would come back and they'd be beat up. They would be, they'd be hurt, they'd be running slow and all sorts of stuff like that. And so next time they went on this journey, they gave them fermented fish. They gave them fish that had been rotting in a pit for, a couple of weeks. And
Okay.
they fed that to the dogs. And the dogs ran twice as fast and no injuries and they had gained weight and they were like in great health. So and this is why we let, like when we consume cow meat and other buffalo meat and stuff like that, we let it hang and sit in its own enzymes and digest. So and the
I
real
imagine it would
danger,
ferment a bit as well.
yes, exactly. Yeah. And so the real danger with raw food diets is infection. And our ancestors did things to make sure that, we got the acidity down, all these they knew how to deal with infection. And the closer you get to the equator where infections are more prevalent, you see them doing,
That's
the foods get spicier. Those
yeah.
spices help protect against infection.
Higher rates of infection when you go down to the equator too is just because the temperature is adequate enough
Exactly.
for disease to spread.
Exactly. And this is why we see just not even primitives like but culture in general, their foods are spicier and those chemicals in the plants help fight against bad guys, bad bacteria and fungi.
Okay, so I just want to go back to the study you mentioned earlier. So this is the study you linked me, and you're trying to suggest that because Eskimos were eating like raw foods and the way they prepared it, like I guess they let it ferment or
They're eating
rest
it.
in its own enzymes.
Hmm.
So again, you're trying to claim that the Greenland Eskimos compared to the Danish Eskimos, they had lower cholesterol levels because they were eating an ancestral diet and
Hmm.
they kind of ate raw foods in the proper way, letting it kind of digest in its own enzymes.
Hmm.
Well, again, if you just look at the dietary composition here, the actual Eskimos that were living their traditional lifestyle, they were consuming a hell of a lot less saturated fat. And if you even go down here, okay, well, the Greenland Eskimos, they did have lower cholesterol levels.
Hmm.
Or sorry, this is the proper one. They did have lower cholesterol levels than the
Hmm.
Greenland Eskimos or even the Danes.
Mm-hmm.
But their cholesterol levels were still way above the healthy physiological range.
So
So wait just a second.
okay.
So the claim you're making that, okay, well, the reason cholesterol is like a problem for, modern people is because, okay, well, we're eating cooked food and we're not letting the food digest in its own enzymes. Well, I'm not seeing any evidence for this claim. Like, you linked a study where it's very clear the reason the Greenland Eskimos had lower serum cholesterol is just because they're eating less saturated fat. And on top
They're
of that, even
they're
with
eating less. The Greenland Eskimos were not eating a lot of fat.
they were eating less saturated fat. So the
All they
Greenland
ate was
Eskimos.
like seal oil and stuff like that.
Well, wait. I'll show you again. So this is again the study you linked. You didn't have the full text, but if you go to Sci-Hub, you can usually get the full text.
Okay.
If you go down here, composition of the Eskimo diet and average Danish food. So Eskimos, they generally consumed lower percentage of their calories from saturated fat. And then when you go down here, they have lower cholesterol levels, but their cholesterol levels are still really fucking high. So I'm not really seeing a good argument here for this idea that, okay, well, the Eskimos had lower cholesterol because they were eating raw food that had a chance to kind of digest in its own enzymes, and therefore their dietary saturated fat and cholesterol wasn't a problem. Well, that's clearly not the case. They were just eating less saturated fat compared to the Danes and the Danish Eskimos. And on top of that, they still had really high cholesterol.
Okay, so I want to model my health off of healthy populations. And when we look at healthy populations, I mean, when you say healthy and like most of the studies that are done for,
You know what?
nowadays.
Define healthy.
Yeah,
I think that's
define when
important.
yeah. So when I define healthy, I'm talking about people that Weston A. Price was talking about. These people were so healthy, they had perfectly straight teeth, no cavities, didn't brush their teeth, could see the moons of Jupiter with the naked eye. When they had babies,
The Greeks could do that too. That's not difficult.
okay. And so, I mean, when you look at Greek culture, you hear stories of women dying in childbirth and stuff like that. I mean, it depends on what time period you're in. But when you read stories about our ancestors, I mean, there's a story about Lewis and Clark, and it's in the middle of winter, and they're in the middle of nowhere, and this Native American woman, is guiding them, through the Rocky Mountains or something like that, and she's pregnant, and she's like, "Okay, wait, give me a second, one guys, I'm having my baby right now." She walks off into the woods and comes back 30 minutes later with a baby, throws it on her back, and they keep walking. Now, today, even like when healthy people have babies, it's this big fiasco when it should be this, just like this easy event.
For some people, it is. Some women just have wider hips, wider vaginas, and some people just have an easier time giving childbirth. Like that story you're talking about with the Native American woman, she probably just had a larger vagina, wider hips, and it was just easier for her to give birth. Not every birth is
true.
like really difficult, but generally they are, just because the cranial mass of a baby is bigger than a woman's vagina. Like, our heads have expanded so quickly that women's vaginas haven't caught up, literally.
If someone has crowded teeth, their body didn't have enough nutrients to build a proper set of teeth. That is a sign that a woman's pelvic bone isn't going to be wide enough for an easy birth. We are not getting the correct nutrients to build a proper skeleton, yet alone have a baby.
Okay, I'm a little confused. So you're saying that improper nutrition coincides with women who have thinner hips, like that aren't as wide, and when a woman has hips that aren't as wide, that results in children having impacted teeth?
Crowded teeth is a sign the body didn't get enough nutrients in the childhood stages.
Okay, but just to be clear, is it because, like, if a woman, or sorry, like, yeah, so you're saying improper nutrition results in women with narrower hips, and when women have narrower hips, that results in crowded teeth for the infant? Or is it just like if the mother doesn't eat enough nutrients, then the child has bad dental development.
Yes, we need enough nutrients to build a healthy body.
Okay.
And when people were getting married in these traditional cultures, every single one of them was pretty much put on a high cholesterol diet. They were either gorged on egg yolks, butter, raw
Where?
butter,
Okay, what
or
cultures?
we have the Swiss Alps.
Okay.
It was so important to them. They at church they would take the summer butter, and when you measure the levels of vitamin A in that butter, it's very high compared to other times of the year.
Okay.
They would go to church and put it on an altar. It was like religious for them. We go to Africa, and we have people like the Maasai, and they had was blood. They drank blood, dairy, and meat.
They actually have pretty high rates of atherosclerosis, especially for like hunter-gatherer populations. I was having a debate with that guy Frank Defano, and he actually linked
Yeah,
research on it.
I have some more research about that because they've been pretty modernized lately,
Well,
and
all of this is kind of besides the point. So do you still disagree that saturated fat and cholesterol elevate serum cholesterol?
I saturated fat and cholesterol is essential for health, and that's
Okay,
why your
sure,
liver
but you
creates
don't.
it.
Okay, sure, but you don't think there's a limit to how much you should consume.
I mean, with the Eskimos having an 80% diet in saturated fat or fat in general.
Well,
Um,
they had very high rates of atherosclerosis, and if you actually look at the paper that Lauren Cordain co-authored, they also had the highest average cholesterol scores of any hunter-gatherer population that they analyzed.
mhm.
So,
So
like
I
again,
would say that I mean I don't want to eat a diet that's 80% fat. Like I love
okay,
butter and
sure.
I love lard and tallow and all those other foods, but they were the only out of what Weston A. Price found, and let's remember Weston A. Price was a vegetarian before he did this stuff, so he was on the hunt for a vegetarian population that was healthy, and he couldn't find one. He found a few, but they had
Um,
lots and lots of
Okay, you do realize that the Californian Adventist vegetarians have the highest average life expectancy of any population on Earth?
what's like the average.
Okay, so the average for Americans is like 76 or 78. The
Hmm.
Adventist vegetarians, it's like 86 to 88.
Okay.
So it's 10 years longer on average. A lot of people bring up Okinawa as well. They have the most amount of centenarians, but that's different than average life expectancy. If we're actually looking at average life expectancy, the Californian Adventist vegetarians have the highest average life expectancy. The Okinawans have the most amount of people living over 100. And I'd argue that's very likely something to do with just genetics. They probably have genetics that favor longer life expectancy, which is why you see more people living over 100. But in terms of average, the highest average is among the Californian Adventist vegetarians. And among the Californian Adventist vegetarians, vegans have the lowest risk of heart disease, diabetes, overall cancers, although some specific cancer sites, like cancers of the gastrointestinal tract, are lower among vegetarians,
hmm
and lower rates of obesity, hypertension, things like that.
I mean, I have a few vegan friends and vegetarian friends, and when I hang out with them, I feel like all they talk about are their health problems.
Well, that's
I
just an
see
anecdote.
a lot of people who go vegetarian, and it destroys their digestive health,
Well, again, that's just an anecdote.
depression. I
Well,
mean,
do you have any research showing that on average, when people go vegan or vegetarian, they have worse overall health outcomes?
the nutrients in the food just drastically reduces.
Not necessarily.
Most people are. I mean, if you take your average meat eater and your average vegetarian, neither of them are eating a healthy diet in America.
Um, you could argue that, but if you look at the Adventist cohorts, the Adventist vegetarians and vegans did extraordinarily well. Lower rates of heart disease, diabetes, overall cancer, hypertension, obesity.
When we read Reston A. Price's book, we're hearing stories like all around the globe or all around the world. We're hearing people like 80 years old doing hard manual labor and I've seen stories of
Yeah, sure. Like, I'm sure
Eskimos
that can
having like
happen.
20 kids. You know, who has 20 kids and
Okay,
can
well,
still.
these are all anecdotes. Like, I've seen Ansel Key, or not Ansel Keys, Weston A. Price's, some of
Hmm.
Weston A. Price's research. Some of it's interesting, like especially the dental stuff. Like, he was a dentist,
Yeah, yeah.
but that's that's kind of besides the point of the discussion. Like, we've kind
Our
of wandered off into
Yeah, we
overall
have.
health, but I want to kind of stress the point. Like, so you already agree with me that elevated serum cholesterol is a risk factor for heart disease independently, correct?
Sure, but
You
I think we
do?
have two different definitions of high. There's like
Okay.
high off the because
Okay, well, define what is higher than what is safe, healthy, physiologically normal. Like, what is the range? I just want to know what you consider the healthy, normal physiological range where atherosclerosis won't occur.
so when you were looking at that hunter gatherer study,
Okay.
that would be the ideal.
Okay, so 50 to 70.
Hmm. I Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so you
Um,
agree that 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter is the healthy, normal physiological range where atherosclerosis does not occur.
the big factor that I see in atherosclerosis is what is damaging the arteries, what is damaging the body, and then does the body have enough nutrients, the right nutrients, to repair that damage and do normal maintenance repairs.
Okay, so it sounds like you're not totally convinced that uh, saturated fat and cholesterol raise serum cholesterol.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not
Really?
convinced.
Okay, well, I can just disprove that pretty quickly.
Well, so have you heard of Dr. Gundry at all?
No.
So Dr. Gundry's a pretty cool guy. He's really recent actually. He wrote a book called The Plant Paradox, and he's pretty. So he used to be a heart surgeon, and
Okay, I think I might have heard of this guy. He was saying lectins are dangerous.
mhm,
Okay, well, that's complete and utter horseshit. Like,
okay,
I don't have anything other to say than that. Like I've seen a number of these books come out by these people. Lectins are dangerous. Phytates are dangerous. Well, the foods that are high in like lectins and phytates,
mhm,
they're the foods that are associated with the lowest risk of chronic disease. Like I see phytates more like that lectin thing is kind of new, and he's kind of out there with that. But I've always heard like people bring up phytates. A lot of these like
mhm,
pro paleo guys, um, beans and legumes like lentils
mhm,
in every fucking study you can imagine, even the most recent Pure study that came out, they reduce rates of chronic disease, including heart disease, and they're associated with a longer life expectancy. And contrary to a lot of these people's beliefs, oh, phytates are anti-nutrients. Well, phytate consumption is associated with lower risk of osteoporosis in women and better bone mineral density. So like this crap about, oh, like lectins are evil, phytates are evil, or whatever fucking thing you can see, like whatever little tiny nutrient you see in plants, oh, that's the devil. I don't buy it. Like, if you actually look at the research, there's no association between this crap and chronic disease and lower life expectancy.
So there are thousands of types of there's tons of different types of lectins, and there's some that are actually good for you, and then there's some that are the plant trying to protect itself. And yes, you can eat these foods and be totally fine. And when we look at what our ancestors were doing, they were deactivating the anti-nutrients
What, by like
in these
soaking and shit or fermenting?
soaking, fermenting, types of cooking. I mean,
Okay,
they did
that's
all
not a
sorts
bad
of
idea.
things.
Yeah, like that's not a bad idea. It helps with nutrient absorption and shit. But do you have any evidence, like any actual evidence that like consumption of plant foods is associated with increased risk of chronic disease or earlier mortality?
Well, so there's a big difference between eating, beans that have been pressure cooked and beans that have been boiled for a couple hours. I don't know how you cook beans. It's for example, like the Spanish and the Italians, they would not touch tomatoes when they first came on board, because when they first came to Europe from Peru, because they would get sick from eating them. And
No,
then
it's not that
they
they'd get sick from
discovered
eating them. No, it's not that they'd get
they
sick
had
from
to
eating them.
peel
It's
them
because it's
and
not that they'd
eat
get
them.
sick from eating them. It's
And
just
that's where
it
the
was literally
anti-nutrients are.
assumed. It was literally assumed that they were poisonous.
They are, if you eat the seeds and the skins, because the plant does
Okay.
not want you eating its babies.
Do you have any research showing that eating tomatoes is associated with increased risk of heart disease, diabetes, cancer, or lower life expectancy? Because most people eat tomatoes with the skin on.
Yes, I know, and that's why most people are sick in America nowadays.
So most people are sick in America because they're
Yes,
not peeling their tomatoes. Like
that
I
among various foods, whole grains,
okay,
not
so do
peeling
you
of
have any
potatoes.
okay, do
It
you
doesn't
have
just happen
any well
overnight.
listen, do you have any research showing that whole grain intake is associated with increased risk of chronic disease like heart disease, diabetes, cancer, or lower life expectancy?
I can show you that when lectins enter the bloodstream, for example, gluten is designed to rip apart your digestive membranes and then get into your blood. And then I'm sure it causes all sorts of issues once it gets into your bloodstream.
That doesn't typically happen. I have seen research on gluten where there's some people who have leaky gut, quote unquote, and that could
Hmm.
be caused by a number of issues. But I have seen some case reports of people who have a leaky gut, and when gluten enters their bloodstream, they can even develop psychotic episodes.
Yeah,
And I'm sure you can find a number of foods that might do that, but that's not a common circumstance. And again, if you look at
I would say like a huge
well,
part of the
dude,
American population, or modern population, is not preparing their grains, nuts, seeds, and legumes correctly.
okay, well, do you
Because I
have
see it.
any data among the US population where gluten, whole grains, beans, legumes are associated with increased rates of heart disease, diabetes, cancer, or just increase overall mortality?
All right, so I have studies that show what is this one? So this is salinic acid. This is a lectin right here. This lectin right here um, promotes atherosclerosis and liver inflammation by suppressing protective function perfect protective functions of B1 cells. So this lab study is showing that once this gets into the bloodstream, this lectin gets into the bloodstream. I'm not sure what plant it's from. It starts causing issues, and it starts causing inflammation in the body. And this is another reason why the body starts creating more cholesterol to heal the damage. Because we have
Okay,
to
well, click
remember,
on the link. Well, click on the link. I'm not convinced that your body creates more cholesterol in response to inflammation. I'd like to see a study on that specifically.
how is it going to heal the damage in the body? Every single cell every cell membrane is made of cholesterol.
Okay, well, do you have an actual study that shows if you induce some sort of inflammatory response, that inflammatory response itself raises cholesterol?
I might have that somewhere. So let's look at this. This is saying that this
Well, look
lectin.
right there, like right there. Bring it up again.
I'm at it right now. Can you see it?
Yeah, it says the first sentence: atherosclerosis is sustained by hypercholesterolemia, so elevated
Okay.
serum cholesterol in the blood. So
Yes.
it's agreeing with me. You're just talking about another like confounding factor. So it's like it's the same as smoking. Like I could say, oh well, smoking causes heart disease. Well, yeah, it's a confounding factor, but really, it just makes high cholesterol much worse. So like,
Okay.
okay,
So
like
this
just
is
for the
make.
sake of
So
argument,
you're agreeing that this makes cholesterol, or this makes matters worse. This makes inflammation worse.
Can you can you like actually link me that in the chat?
Yeah.
Like, okay, just for the sake of argument, like this isn't really that important, but let's just say for the sake of argument, okay, well, this particular lectin uh, does increase risk of heart disease, assuming that it actually gets into the bloodstream. Okay, well, the study here, it actually agrees with my statement that elevated serum cholesterol, why is it doing that? Yeah, atherosclerosis is initiated and sustained by hypercholesterolemia, which results in the generation of oxidized LDL. Well, I've already talked about how LDL, just adding dietary cholesterol, increases the it increases the ability of the LDL in your serum to oxidation.
Hmm.
Saturated fat also triggers inflammation. So, yeah, this is just talking about a confounding factor. So, okay, sialic acid binding immunoglobulin lectin G. Okay, well, it promotes inflammation once it gets into the serum, but
Hmm.
the actual cause of atherosclerosis is hypercholesterolemia. So you're just linking me a study that's just proving my own argument.
All right. So these lectins are getting into the bloodstream and ripping apart your arteries. That's what they're designed to do.
Okay, no, what it does is it causes
And then your
oxidative
body,
modification. No, listen, what it's doing is it's causing oxidative modification to your LDL particles. And then once your LDL particles become oxidized, they embed themselves in the arterial wall.
so
So the
okay,
cholesterol itself is the problem here.
so if cholesterol is evenly spread throughout the blood, whether it's in the arteries or the capillaries or the veins, there's cholesterol all throughout the blood. It's the same everywhere in the blood.
Okay.
Why is it only clotting in the arteries and not the capillaries and the veins?
I don't know. What does that have to do
I don't
with
know
whether or
either.
not elevated serum cholesterol causes atherosclerosis?
You would think if cholesterol was clogging stuff, it would clog the capillaries and the veins as well, but it's not.
Okay.
And then when we look at the plaques, they're mostly composed of fibrin. They're mostly composed of protein.
Again,
So
that
even
can
if we
vary.
reduce the
Well, again,
cholesterol, you're only going to reduce the amount of plaque by maybe 10%.
okay, that's actually massively significant. Okay, first of all, you can reduce plaques by more than 10%. Secondly, um, you have to look at it like plumbing. So there's a cross-sectional area. So, you know, your artery is a tube, and if you look at the cross-section, so it's a hole, it
Hmm.
requires a very significant blockage in the cross-sectional area to cause enough reduction in blood flow to cause things like angina, chest pain, and increase your risk of actually suffering a myocardial infarction. I believe it's 3/4 of the cross-sectional area. So if about 20 to 30% of that atheroma that that takes up the cross-sectional area, if
Hmm.
you can get rid of it by eating a low saturated fat and cholesterol diet, well, then you've opened up your arteries enough where the cross-sectional area is wide enough to not impede blood flow. So if 75% of the cross-sectional area is blocked, so you have a significant blockage, it's actually
Hmm.
significantly
But
blocking
there's
blood
still a
flow.
blockage though,
Well, no,
and
no,
there
no,
shouldn't be a
listen.
blockage.
Well, listen. So 75% of the cross-sectional area is blocked. About 20 to 30% of that is from cholesterol buildup. So if you eat a low saturated fat cholesterol buildup, low saturated fat cholesterol diet, you'll see the cholesterol in that atheroma disappear. So the amount of blockage in the cross-sectional area goes from 75% to about 60, 50%. That's enough to not impede blood flow. And again, I just give me one moment. I have a study from Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn here. If you just give me a second to find it.
So what's the Mayo Clinic saying nowadays about atherosclerosis? I'm gonna look something up too.
Okay, so I found it here. So, a way to reverse CAD. So, this is research conducted by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn of the Cleveland Clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, what he did was he had a group of patients with severe coronary artery disease.
Mm-hmm.
This study was actually conducted before statin drugs were created, by the way. So, this is without drug treatment.
Okay.
Following a low-fat, cholesterol-free, whole food plant-based diet that also restricted oils and even nuts. So it was extremely low fat, about 10% of calories from fat, very high fiber as well. The left anterior descending coronary artery, extraordinarily diseased. And then after 32 months of a plant-based diet intervention, the artery opened up again. So, and here's another image from positron emission tomography. So it's just, it's just another way of looking at the cross section of the artery, massively opened up. So
I mean,
again,
they were using, so the Mayo Clinic, I don't know what they're doing now, but the Mayo Clinic 100 years ago, they were using the raw milk cure to heal people of heart disease and atherosclerosis. They would put them on raw milk and their arteries would open right back up. And that is
okay,
high cholesterol.
where's the study? I'd like to see the nutrient composition of their diet, the amount of calories they're consuming, and its effect on serum lipid profiles. Do you have the research?
It's in the book somewhere. I don't have it on me.
Okay, well then without actually looking at it, I can't take you for your word.
Okay. I mean, it seems like, so should babies be drinking raw milk
Their
to
mother's milk.
to grow healthy?
Yeah, their mother's milk.
How do you think the mother like puts that nutrients in the milk? It has to.
By eating food.
Yes, it needs, and the nutrients in those foods vary greatly.
Okay, and do you have any evidence that you need to eat a diet high in saturated fat, cholesterol to get an adequate amount of nutrients as a mother?
So when every single organ in the body is high in cholesterol, and every single cell in the body is made of cholesterol, yes, it's important to eat a diet high in cholesterol. If you're injured or you're building a baby or if you're feeding a baby, if you're a woman, you need to have these high cholesterol foods in your diet. And this is what our primitive ancestors were doing everywhere.
Okay, well, that's
Australia,
just an appeal
the
to
Hawaiian
that's an appeal to
Islands.
nature and appeal to tradition. Do you have any evidence that a high saturated fat and cholesterol diet improves wound healing, has results in healthier babies? Do you have any evidence for this?
Yeah, I'm when at
Okay,
Heal Your Gut Guy.
just give me like a study or a meta-analysis.
We don't even know what these people are eating in these meta-analyses. Like it's
Okay,
like
well,
all over
so
the
you're saying
place.
you don't actually have any evidence of this?
No, I have. All right, so what's the exact question?
Okay, so you're claiming that a high saturated fat and cholesterol diet improves things like wound healing, and it makes children healthier as well. I guess in a generalized sense, babies are healthier when their mothers consume more saturated fat and cholesterol. I'd like to
Mhm.
see like a study of this or a meta-analysis, ideally.
Okay, one second. I'm pulling up my screen. All right, so just recently in human baby formula, they started putting in toxic vegetable oils, which are made in a factory, and soy oil.
Okay, this is
And
completely
then,
besides the point.
but when we look at your average animal baby formula, they all have animal fats in it. And that's because, and
This has nothing to
rates
do.
are extremely high for autism and all sorts of these, low cholesterol diets are associated with brain disorders because the brain is like 50% cholesterol. It's very important.
Okay, where's the evidence that low cholesterol diets are associated with brain disorders?
I mean, if we just look at our society nowadays, all the kids in the schools are on all sorts of
They're
medication.
not eating a low cholesterol diet. They're not eating a
I
low
mean,
saturated fat diet either.
well, we also have to keep into account there's a big difference between, getting a pasture raised egg yolk and getting, you know,
Okay, well, you can make that claim all you want, but do you have any actual evidence in the form of research that low cholesterol diets result in brain disorders, like attention
I
deficit
do, but
disorder
you don't
even?
seem to like it. You seem to like
Well, no,
the
give me the
meta
research. I
analysis.
want to see it. Like if there's a meta-analysis, we'll look at it and we'll criticize it.
I don't like looking at these big surveys because they don't get into the nitty gritty details of what these
Okay,
people were
so
doing.
I don't care. Give me any evidence at all. Do you have any evidence that a low saturated fat and cholesterol diet results in brain disorders, even as minor as like attention deficit disorder?
I I mean I mean that's not minor, but so okay, so if we're looking at this one doctor, Dr. Maynard Murray, um,
Okay, these are whales. Like, I don't
yes,
care.
we're these are all similarities found throughout the animal kingdom.
Okay,
We
do
all might
whales,
metabolize fat differently, but why could these guys eat a ton of
humans
fat?
are not whales. Okay. I don't even know why I have to say that. But I'm asking you, like, you're making a series of claims, but I just want to push you on this because I can't just let this go unanswered. You're
Hmm.
claiming that low saturated fat and cholesterol diets result in less healthy babies and children. You need saturated fat and cholesterol to have healthy children. And these kids who have mothers who are eating low saturated fat and cholesterol diets, or they're being brought up on a low saturated fat and cholesterol diets, they have higher rates of like brain disorders, ranging from things like autism to just attention deficit disorders. Do you have any evidence of that whatsoever? Just any research, like
Yeah,
it could just be
I'd
a
have to
small
look it up.
trial.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
uh,
I'd prefer a meta-analysis because you can generally find research pointing in any direction. And just we're under time constraints and shit. So I'd prefer a meta-analysis to get a more comprehensive look at the data. But if you could provide any evidence at all, that would kind of help your claim.
all right,
Um,
I got something.
but again, like this is kind of besides the point of the general conversation. So again, like the debate was supposed to focus around whether or not elevated serum cholesterol in like causes atherosclerosis. And I think you
Hmm.
already agree with me now that the healthy normal physiological range for
I
LDL
just don't
cholesterol is 50 to
understand
70 milligrams per
how
deciliter.
you don't think it's important to eat a vital building block of your body. Like,
Your own body produces cholesterol. We already know what the healthy normal physiological range of cholesterol is.
mhm.
So if you do anything to go above that range, it's very clear that that increases your risk of heart disease. And where's the evidence that you need cholesterol to be healthy? There's no evidence whatsoever. I haven't heard anyone anywhere, like any sort
You
of
have to read
organization.
Weston A. Price's book and be familiar with what the primitives did, and which
Okay,
you
I
don't
don't care
believe.
what I don't care what ancient societies did. I don't care about the claims of a dentist who did some research back in,
Well, their health was much better than mine, and much better than yours, and much better
was
than.
it? I
Yes, it
don't know.
was. It was.
Well, I don't think so.
It
Like again,
was.
the longest living population on Earth is the Californian Adventist vegetarians. They're eating a plant-based diet. Lowest rates of heart disease, diabetes, cancer.
Well,
Um,
the Hunza people, the people in the Hunza mountains they were living to like 120, 140.
okay, what was their average life expectancy?
I don't know what
And
their
where
average life
how do you know
expectancy
how do you
was.
know that these people are living to 140? Where are their birth certificates? Do you have any way of backing
They
up those
don't have
claims?
birth
Okay,
certificates
so you have no
in
way
the
of confirming
outback.
those claims. So you have no way of confirming those claims. You're just taking them on their word.
I
This person's
guess
140.
I guess
Right.
not.
So
Yes.
there's absolutely no evidence that these people there were living to 140 years old.
When I hear stories from all around the world about how healthy these people were,
Well, there's
and
stories about dragons and
when
shit.
I go on these are the diets I went on to heal my so-called incurable disease. My body would not have been able to heal, and the people who take our course, their bodies would not be able to heal if they didn't have the cholesterol to repair
That's an
damaged
anecdotal claim.
tissues.
That's an anecdotal claim. Where's the evidence? Where's the
It
evidence
doesn't
that
make it
you
not true.
absolutely require cholesterol to heal your gut? Where's the evidence?
You're not liking the evidence I'm showing you. You
You're
want me
not
to show
showing
you
evidence. You're just making anecdotal claims,
meta-analyses.
and you're making appeals to nature and tradition. And when I ask you to provide
Who do
evidence,
you
you're
think
not
judges
providing
your
any
health?
evidence. Sorry?
Who do you think evaluates your health at the end of the day? Because Mother Nature is the judge, jury, and executioner of our health at the end of the day.
Okay, right. And
Not like some.
Californian Adventist vegetarians seem to have the best overall health outcomes. They have the lowest rates of chronic disease and the longest average life expectancy.
You know what? And I don't know their backgrounds. You know, I don't. How long were they on the vegetarian diet? Because
Their entire lives, because it's their religious belief.
Yeah, I would model my health off of a primitive population.
Off of
That
a primitive population that you
yes.
don't know much about, who claims that they have elders that are 140 years old when there's absolutely no evidence to back up those claims. And you're basing this all off of a book written by a dentist
Yes.
who said, oh, well, their teeth are perfect. So, you know, this seems like a trend among dentists, because I remember a few years ago, I've gotten into a few arguments with dentists. They weren't like live debates or anything, but just in the comment section.
Cavities are the first sign that the body's running out of nutrients. It's playing
Well,
triage.
it's also a sign of just eating too much sugar, like processed food, and not brushing enough. So
These
just because you have,
people did not brush their teeth,
okay,
and
is
their
it
teeth were
possible?
coated with starchy
Okay,
foods.
okay,
So
cool.
that's not it either.
Is it possible to have poor dental health but have good heart health?
No,
No, really.
no.
You're saying it's
I bet
absolutely
every one
impossible to
of those
have.
people have horrible dental health. I
Okay,
bet
where's the evidence that if your dental health is poor, you automatically have poor heart health? How are they directly related?
if your body cannot create healthy teeth, what makes you think it's going to create a healthy heart?
Okay, that's not answering my question. How is dental health directly related to heart health? Like, okay, I don't brush my teeth.
If the body isn't creating strong teeth, that's a sign
What do you
that
mean
there's
creating
nutritional.
strong teeth? Your teeth erode over time. So if you have poor dental health,
And
that's not directly
if the
related to heart
body
health.
has the correct nutrients, it can heal those. It can heal those cavities and keep your teeth nice and
Okay, do you
strong.
have any evidence for that? And do you have any evidence that that's directly related to heart health? You don't think it's possible to eat a diet that's great for dental health but also causes heart disease at the same time? So let's just assume for the sake of argument, it's true. You can eat a diet that heals your teeth. I find that a very dubious claim. I've never heard of any of this from an actual dentist before.
Well,
But
the
let's just assume
dentists,
for the sake of argument. No, let's just assume for the sake of
I mean,
argument, I'll
dentists are
agree
doing a
with you
great
right now.
job with dental
No,
rates being as high as they are,
well,
cavity rates
cool,
being as high
cool.
as they are.
Like, I'll agree with you for now, just for the sake of argument, that you can eat a diet that heals your teeth.
Yes. And
So
I've done
let's.
that, and I've seen many, many other people do
Okay,
that.
great. Okay, great. So where is the evidence that if you're eating a diet that heals your teeth, you can't also at the same time cause the progression of atherosclerosis?
I don't have a study or
Okay,
numbers
so
for that.
you don't have any real evidence for these claims. So it's possible to have poor dental health, but also have good heart health. And I'm sure it's possible to have great heart health and put yourself at high risk of cancer. I'm sure it is possible even to put yourself at high risk of diabetes, but also have good heart health. These things do have overlap. I'd agree, but
Hmm.
they are still exclusive to one another.
Yeah. Your body is constantly playing triage. When it doesn't have the nutrients to do something, it's like, all right, we got to throw this overboard. You know, we can't support this system anymore. And the heart's going to be the last one because, you know, if your heart's not pumping, you're dead. But we can we can have the teeth erode away. That sucks, but you know
Okay,
that's what's happening.
do you think it's possible that certain diets are better for certain things and certain diets have trade-offs? So let's just say, for the sake of argument, a vegan or vegetarian diet isn't the best diet for dental health, but it could possibly be the best diet for heart health.
I I I disagree with that.
Okay, why?
It's because the vegan and vegetarian diet is severely lacking in vitamin A, vitamin D, and vitamin K2. And I know
Okay,
I
not
know you can
necessarily.
get K2 in natto, but
That's the highest dietary source that you
I
could
don't
possibly get
see a
it
lot
for.
of vegetarians and vegans eating
Okay, well, that's
natto.
fine, but it is possible to eat a lot of natto on a vegan or vegetarian diet.
And there's different types of K2.
Okay.
And so I don't know even, and those are probably aren't in natto. So it's
Okay. So just
I'm
in principle, like just to be clear, in principle, the idea that certain diets have benefits and trade-offs, you don't think that's true? You think that a certain diet can be better in one aspect, but not be good in another aspect compared to another diet?
Yeah, sure. But when we look at what our healthy primitive populations were eating, they were eating different foods, but they were still striving to get those high fat soluble vitamins and other sorts of things. They weren't
Okay,
just
it-
they weren't limiting the saturated fat and the cholesterol.
okay, this is kind of trailing off into general health, so I kind of just want to try to refocus things again. Um, do you agree that elevated serum cholesterol itself is a risk factor for heart disease?
Elevated cholesterol, the high cholesterol means there's inflammation in the body. The body is damaged, and the body is pumping more cholesterol into the blood to try
Okay,
to heal things.
do you have any evidence for that claim? Do you have any research at all that shows inflammation itself elevates cholesterol?
When you look at these studies,
Like,
they're
I
when we everything we just looked at, everything we looked at, the higher the cholesterol level, the more clogged the arteries are, the more messed up the arteries are.
okay.
So that shows us that
So
it becomes inflamed, and then it starts rushing
no, 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 no,
cholesterol
no,
to
no.
try to heal it.
That's you can't make that. You can't assume that from the data I showed you. You can assume two things. You can either assume that elevated serum cholesterol itself is what's causing atherosclerosis, or you could assume that inflammation is
But
elevating cholesterol.
we're gonna
No, listen,
ignore
listen.
lectins ripping up the arteries.
Okay, well, that's not what the data you
I've
showed
also
suggested. It suggested that lectins cause oxidative modification to LDL particles, and elevated LDL is what causes atherosclerosis to begin with. It's just that these lectins make it worse. So again, from the data I showed you, you can assume two things. You could assume that elevated serum cholesterol itself is an independent risk factor for atherosclerosis, and it is the cause of atherosclerosis. Or you could make the assumption you're making and say that inflammation is what's elevating these cholesterol scores, and inflammation is the problem, but cholesterol is just being raised, and it's sort of an indirect factor in heart disease. So do you have any evidence for that claim? Do you have any evidence that inflammation itself raises serum cholesterol?
so here's some more evidence. So when we dissect these plaques and we look at them, they have infections in them. They have infections in them like candida and stuff, and that's another. Inflammation is the body sending immune system to that part of the body to try to fix things.
That's not showing a direct mechanistic link. Do you have any inflammation? Like, this should be easy enough to prove in a metabolic wart experiment, whether you can induce inflammation in a bunch of ways.
The
Do you
problem
have
with this
any? Well, no.
experiment
Do you
is
have
that they're
any?
not using an ancestral diet. They're using some sort of
It doesn't
modern
matter.
diet.
It doesn't matter. You're claiming that inflammation itself is what raises cholesterol. So you can raise inflammation in a number of different ways. You could
Yes,
raise it by introducing an infection or
infection,
something. Do you have any
lectins,
evidence? Do you have any evidence that inflammation
malnutrition.
itself elevates serum cholesterol?
Um,
Because also you can Ufi Ravenscoff. I'm sure you're familiar with him. Have you ever heard of him?
maybe. Who? What did he do?
Okay, so Ufi Ravenscoff, I consider him a quack. He's one of like the big cholesterol denialist researchers out there.
Hmm.
He was actually arguing that low cholesterol levels are a big risk factor for infection, and the infections
Because white blood cells are made out of
and
cholesterol.
okay, well, again,
Because
I haven't seen
everything
any
important in the
research.
body is made out of
Well, that's great.
cholesterol.
I haven't seen
And
any research suggesting
you're
that
just
high
hiring it.
cholesterol.
You're
Well,
making your
listen.
body do work it
Well,
doesn't need to
great,
be
great.
doing,
Listen,
creating
but listen.
cholesterol.
That's great, but listen. There's a lot of research that he linked showing that infections and disease themselves lower cholesterol. So certain parasitic infections, for instance, they can lower your cholesterol levels because the parasites eat up cholesterol and saturated fat. Certain infections have a confounding ability to lower your cholesterol. So, say if you get sick with the flu, you lose your appetite, your cholesterol levels drop. Certain cancers can do that as well. Certain cancer medications can do that. Certain cancers themselves metabolize cholesterol in your blood to grow and proliferate, and that can lower cholesterol. So, like, if you're going to claim infections themselves, like something that introduces inflammation into the body, elevates your serum cholesterol, well, there's actually evidence contrary to that fact where either directly or by confounding variables, infections lower
So I should get an infection to lower my cholesterol?
no, you shouldn't. Infections are a bad thing, but I'm saying low cholesterol is a good thing in the prevention of heart disease. You can lower your cholesterol by getting AIDS, but AIDS
Yeah.
isn't good for you. We can agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
But the point I'm making is you're like I keep asking you for evidence for this claim that inflammation is what's elevating cholesterol. Cholesterol isn't a doesn't have a direct causal impact on heart disease, but it's inflammation that's causing the elevation in cholesterol. So people are wrongfully making a correlation between cholesterol and heart disease when it's really inflammation. Okay, well, wait,
Well,
again,
you don't
where's
believe
the
this,
evidence?
but the
Again,
Eskimos that had high cholesterol, blood cholesterol, they did not have inflammation in their arteries. I know you're going to
okay,
disagree with
well,
that.
they
You're
had
not
high
going to
rates of
agree with
ischemic
that.
heart disease. So,
They
like,
don't.
yeah, they do. They
They
had the
do when
same
they
rates of
follow
ischemic
a
heart
modern
disease.
diet, but when they stay on their traditional diet,
Well,
they
no,
have virtually
on their
none.
traditional
Their
diet, they
hearts
had
are
the same
perfectly
rates of
healthy.
ischemic heart disease, and then once they've stopped going on their traditional diet, their rates of ischemic heart disease deaths have actually decreased.
That is like totally false.
Okay,
The,
well, give me a moment, and I should be able to actually find a paper
I,
that discusses this.
anytime you find a study where they're doing those sorts of studies, those traditional populations were not on their ancestral diet. I saw the one with Frank. I mean, some Maasai tribes are very modernized, and others still stick to their roots. And the ones that stick to their roots have really good heart health, even though their cholesterol is somewhat high compared to the numbers of doctors nowadays. So, talk about.
I'm going to try to see if I can find a full text for this paper. I might not be able to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, I can't find a full text, but I'll just screen share here.
Okay.
Okay, so low incidence of cardiovascular disease among the Inuit. What is the evidence? This paper was published March 2003.
Okay.
Now, if you read down here, a decreasing trend in mortality from ischemic heart disease in Inuit populations undergoing rapid westernization supports the need for a critical rethinking of cardiovascular disease epidemiology among the Inuit and the role of the marine diet in this population. So the authors of this paper are noting that we're actually seeing decreases in deaths from ischemic heart disease, so the clogging of your arteries, in the Inuit populations who are eating a more westernized diet and have a more westernized lifestyle. And, if you just read the full abstract, they're talking about how the reporting in the Inuit populations, when the first explorers went there, they were making false assumptions about mortality rates and the
These
protection of
these these
omega-3
were
fats.
people who lived with the Eskimos for 20 years. These people were probably there for, and we don't know how modernized the people that they're referencing in the study.
Okay.
We have accounts for multiple Arctic explorers and multiple doctors who lived with these people for like 20 or 30 years, and they never saw anyone have any sort of heart issues. Their heart health was perfect and their overall health was perfect. And then these doctors would be in town treating the Inuits on a modern diet, and it was just like, you name it. If it wasn't heart disease, they were dying of tuberculosis or something.
Okay.
Their health overall in general was bad.
Okay. Again, the reporting on these earlier studies, it's been proven to be just inaccurate. Their heart disease rates at the time were already as high as the American population. And according to this more recent report, the Eskimos who are eating a more westernized diet have lower rates of deaths from ischemic heart disease.
And when we look back to that paper, that initial study, I mean, I think it's just way too convenient to dismiss that, all these people who were on a high cholesterol diet down here, they just, France, one of the most modernized countries in the world.
For underreporting, if you control for underreporting, France fits the line of data.
That they're one of the most modern countries, especially during this time. It doesn't make any sense that they were underreporting.
No, it does. Again, the data was underreported.
And then when we look at the Eskimos, I mean, they were down here, and their fat consumption was off the charts.
The Eskimo are a small population spread across a wide area. You really think the data on Eskimos is going to be accurate on that chart?
I would rather have data that shows how to have a 0% rate of atherosclerosis and heart disease than...
Even if it's inaccurate?
It's accurate.
How?
I mean,
they're a small population spread across a wide area. You're telling me mortality statistics in Nunavut are better than mortality statistics in New York?
Yes. In New York, they have no idea what these people are eating.
Mortality statistics in Nunavut are more accurate than mortality statistics in New York. You can confirm that.
You can draw any conclusions from statistics.
I just want to know whether or not you misspoke or not. So you are confirming that mortality statistics in Nunavut are more accurate than New York.
We have better stats in New York than we do.
Okay, so you agree
that of the Earth.
Okay,
but that doesn't mean that
it's less accurate than other parts of the country.
They don't tell stories of people living in a cities, just women having babies and they throw them on their back and they go about their ways. It's like people like dying in childbirth and all sorts of crazy things.
Okay, so primitive people who don't have access to technology, who don't keep birth certificates, who don't have a modern society, because they tell you stories, it has to be true?
It doesn't have it.
So that story could have been completely and utterly made up, you agree? Of the woman having a baby while she's hiking in the mountains.
Well, I've read these stories in countless settlers' journals.
I've read stories of dragons and people fighting monsters. None of that is necessarily true.
Oh boy.
If somebody told you they saw a Bigfoot, so again, and we're talking about a person who had a video camera, who is a modern person living in modern Western civilization. He filmed Bigfoot. Do you believe it? There's actually video evidence of it. So do you believe in Bigfoot?
I mean, I personally don't believe in Bigfoot.
Well, why? There's video evidence. Don't you think that's better than a story that was made up by some primitive people 100 years ago?
We can say the same thing about these statistics. Are they true? Are they made up?
Well, no, you can't. Are you saying we can't trust the scientific method whatsoever?
No, I agree with the scientific method. Weston A. Price was an actual scientist and had his feet on the ground in multiple locations to confirm what he saw, because he didn't believe his eyes the first few places that he went. He said he just couldn't believe it. These people were in such good health. And he spent 10 years going all around the world confirming it, and then he confirmed it with animal studies.
You can't really confirm that a population has low rates of disease just based on animal studies.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Like, again, we're kind of getting off topic. I was talking to you, like, again, this is a very focused discussion on whether or not elevated serum cholesterol
I
causes
just
atherosclerosis. So just wait a second.
okay.
So the discussion is boiled down to whether or not cholesterol is a direct risk factor,
Hmm.
direct independent, like causal factor, or whether or not it's an indirect non-causal factor. So what you're trying to suggest now is that inflammation is the cause of heart disease, and your body upregulates cholesterol production to try to deal with the inflammatory damage that's going on. Do you have any evidence for that? Do you have any evidence that inflammation in the body raises serum cholesterol? Do you have any metabolic ward experiments, randomized trials, anything like that?
What I'm saying is inflammation is the body's response to injury. That's what it is.
Okay, sure.
So if that is true, then something is damaging the arterial walls.
Okay, well, I already showed you
And
research.
it's almost, I
I
just
already
don't
showed.
know how we can jump to the conclusion that cholesterol, an essential nutrient that builds all the hormones in your body, is in it's essential to everything. And you see it in mother's milk and egg yolks and
Okay,
organs.
here's
How
the
can
question.
that vitamin, this essential nutrient, not it's trying to heal that inflammation, but we're being stupid and we keep injuring the arteries somehow.
Okay,
And I'm
here
looking
is
for sources of injury:
okay. So here's a good question for you.
infection, lectins, and
Cool.
malnutrition.
Cool. So here's a good question for you. If cholesterol is healing injuries and cholesterol is actually preventing heart disease, like that's what it sounds like to you,
Hmm.
how is it that people who genetically have 28% lower LDL cholesterol have an 88% lower risk of coronary heart disease? And this is
So
among a population of people where 1/3 of them smoke and 1/3 of them have hypertension. So if cholesterol is helpful here, why are sequence variations in the PCSK9 gene associated with lower cholesterol and consequently lower rates of coronary heart disease? If cholesterol is
why were
actually
those
protecting
rats
you,
getting
no, if cholesterol was
heart
actually
disease?
protecting you, if cholesterol was
It's
actually
trying
protecting
to.
you, then why do people with genetically low cholesterol levels have lower rates of heart disease? Clearly, cholesterol has a causal relationship, and you can't deny that. Direct causal relationship. And this is, again, among a population of people where 1/3 of them smoked, a third of them had hypertension. So cholesterol, just based on these genetic studies, you cannot deny this. It plays a direct causal role in heart disease. If cholesterol had a protective effect against atherosclerosis, cholesterol is basically the ambulance that's coming over to heal the inflammation. Well, if
Yes,
that's true, then how is it that people with a 28% reduction in LDL cholesterol have an 88% reduction in coronary heart disease risk, even though a third of them smoke?
because they're not getting the complementary nutrients to do the whole job. If you show up to a construction site and you have a bunch of bricks but no motor, what do you think? Like, just shit's gonna fly together. And this is what's happening.
Okay, so you're
Everyone in
saying,
America is pretty
okay,
much on a nutrient deficient diet.
okay, so you're saying, given all these converging lines of data, uh, healthy hunter-gatherer populations, they have an average, serum cholesterol score of 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter.
Hmm.
Um, statin, like cholesterol lowering drug interventions, again, it proves that atherosclerosis stops progressing once your cholesterol score is below 70 milligrams per deciliter. Um, there was a recent study that showed subclinical atherosclerosis occurs when your cholesterol score is above 70 milligrams per deciliter. People who have a cholesterol in the range of 50 to 60 milligrams per deciliter, zero reports of atherosclerosis. Given all of these converging lines of data, you're saying that, well, the only reason high LDL cholesterol is causing atherosclerosis is because you're low in vitamins. So you're saying that in modern Western civilization, cholesterol is in fact a risk factor for heart disease. You should work to lower your cholesterol unless you can get a full assortment of vitamins. Do you have any more data for this claim? Because again, if you're going to claim that the only reason LDL cholesterol is a risk factor in these populations is because they're not getting enough vitamins, okay, well, prove it. Where's the data showing that lack of vitamins is what's causing this?
Animals, and we're animals, humans are animals. Animals and humans, Eskimos, had a high cholesterol diet and did not have heart disease.
Yes, they did. You have
And they
no
did
evidence disproving that fact. They
because
did have high levels of heart disease. I just gave you a recent paper analyzing some of the older data, and they were debunking some of these myths that they didn't have any heart disease rates. Again, that was due to poor reporting. So they did have high rates of heart disease. It was about equivalent to the Americans at the time. They did suffer from ischemic heart disease, so you have no evidence for that claim. And even if you're going to say, okay, well, the Eskimos, they ate a
what are
high
these other
cholesterol
people? We
diet.
don't even
No,
know.
listen,
We don't know
listen,
anything
listen.
about these people. We don't know if they're dying from other diseases because when you don't have
They
cholesterol, your
definitely
brain's
are.
not. They're probably like
If you don't have cholesterol, your brain what?
shuts down because your
Oh, so
brain
your
is
brain shuts down. So
50%
I've been vegan for
cholesterol.
7 years. I've been vegan for 7 years, haven't eaten any cholesterol through that time. So when is my brain going to shut down?
Don't I'm not like trying to push your buttons, but don't you have like
You're
depression and
not
anger
pushing
issues?
you're not pushing my buttons. Okay, so I've seen you bring this up in a video about me where you claimed my depression is caused from my vegan diet. I've had depression my entire life. I was thinking of suicide as early as 6 years old. I
That's
actually
awful,
almost killed
man.
myself. I almost killed
That's
myself at
awful.
8. Once I
You
went
were on a
vegan,
Western diet, man.
listen. Once I went vegan, my depression got better to the point where I didn't want to kill myself anymore. So I don't know what you're
But you
talking about.
still
I
have
also,
issues.
by the way, I
Still have,
also
but
I
there's
also
still
suffered.
depression is still
Well,
there.
listen, I also suffered from hallucinations. They
Uh-huh.
were almost daily. They were almost daily hallucinations. After I stopped eating meat, the hallucinations reduced to where I only had maybe 2 or 3 a month. And
Okay.
once I cut off caffeine, they were pretty much almost entirely gone.
So
So,
caffeine's a huge anti-nutrient in
okay,
plants.
sure.
No, that dude, that's good. I know where you're coming from. I would have shit myself to death if I didn't change the way I ate.
Okay, so again, what's this like? Where's the evidence that your brain shuts down if you're not eating enough dietary cholesterol?
Your brain is made out of cholesterol,
Yeah, and
and if
your own body creates cholesterol
how's it creating that cholesterol?
in the liver.
But think of the all of the energy and materials we're wasting doing that conversion. It would be much easier just
We're
to get
not.
it. We're not.
No, no, it's not. Again, if
So
you're eating,
you aren't
well,
wasting. So if we convert one energy source to a different energy source, we're not like losing energy.
look, it doesn't require much energy to create cholesterol to begin with. And again, if you consume dietary cholesterol or saturated fat, your serum cholesterol elevates to the point where it's above the healthy, normal physiological range, and then that causes atherosclerosis. So it's just a very bad idea.
I mean, you seem like someone who wants to be as efficient as possible, like in your
Okay.
business and
Heart disease
everything.
isn't efficient.
Yeah, exactly. It is not efficient because we are not efficient efficiently managing our bodies, like the nutrients coming in.
Okay.
We when we're not eating cholesterol, we're forcing our body to produce cholesterol when it needs to be focusing on other important tasks.
Do you have any evidence that not consuming dietary cholesterol results in your body not performing other important tasks?
Yes, I mean, I don't have like lab studies on me and stuff, but I mean, you see lots of people with these low cholesterol diets are come in that rat study. They were on the low cholesterol diet. They were still coming down with heart diseases and
That's
stuff like that.
rats. I don't care. Like, forget about animal studies. Like, we're talking about
I mean,
people.
people and animals are people, so they do. I mean, you have
Well,
to.
okay, animals, people are animals, but
Yes.
not all animals are people, and
So
there's
they are
differences between
highly. We're
species.
like 99% genetically the same.
Chimpanzees. We're
It's
99% similar to chimpanzees. Rats, I think the difference is like 70% similar or something.
yeah, but it you see these patterns in Mother Nature. It's
What patterns in Mother Nature?
when It's the efficiency of assimilating nutrients. These herbivore animals, they have digestive systems that are efficient in extracting nutrients from, they're good at making cholesterol. We're not. I don't even know where to begin on how the body starts to create cholesterol. I imagine it's a very intensive process that requires like hundreds of chemical reactions.
Okay, let me ask you this. Are chimpanzees one of the smartest animals on the planet?
I guess you could say that.
Among the
Yeah.
animal kingdom, anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, what is their diet like?
What are they eating? I mean, they're eating fruits and
It's about
bugs.
99% plants, fruits, vegetables, tubers, and then like the 1%, they do eat some insects and they do hunt occasionally. They hunt other smaller monkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so again, there's an example of an extremely smart animal in nature eating a primarily plant-based diet, extremely primarily plant-based. Rare occasions they eat meat, and they're extremely intelligent and strong. Chimpanzees are insanely strong. They can literally rip your arm off.
Yeah. So in their most fragile state of existence, when they're babies, they're on a high cholesterol diet of raw milk.
Yeah, and
Just like
milk.
every single
Are you a
animal on the face
baby?
of the earth.
You're not a baby your entire life. I agree. Like, mother's milk is the best food for a growing infant. But once you're not a baby anymore, that's not the best food for you. Milk is just designed to help you grow as quickly as possible and get into adulthood so that you can survive. It's not something you should eat long term. I've seen this be brought up by other people. Oh, well, if like milk is great for a baby, why isn't it great for an adult? Because you're not a baby.
It has everything we need. It's so important in some cultures. So there's a few tribes in Africa. I mean, dairy and cows are just such an important part of their culture. So in Christianity, we have Adam and Eve as our creation story. For these people, it's Adam and Eve, and then they had a boy and a girl cow. So they've since the dawn of time, these people have been consuming dairy. They consume dairy, raw dairy, not pasteurized dairy, and blood and meat.
You're
They're all
talking
foods
about what
high
was
in
the name?
cholesterol. The
You're
Maasai did
talking
this,
the
and other people
Maasai,
did
yeah.
this.
They have very high rates of
The
atherosclerosis.
mongrels,
It just tends to not get to clinical levels.
consumed horse's milk. The inland Chinese consumed yak's milk.
Okay,
I mean,
great.
everywhere.
What does
Like,
that matter?
you look at
All these cultures also practice genital mutilation. Is genital mutilation a good idea?
no, it's not a good. I
Yeah.
mean,
So, like, just because these
well,
cultures did
I
it,
mean, a lot of people do circumcision and shit like that. I mean, that's genital mutilation to a certain extent.
yeah. Well, that is the definition of genital mutilation, and it should be banned unless medically necessary.
Yeah, yeah, um,
It was originally created to stop people from masturbating. That was literally the original reason they did it.
yeah. That's interesting. I mean, the raw milk cure used to be used all the time to heal people
You do
of all
realize,
sorts of things.
so in ancient China, they used to believe that masturbation caused TB. I'll just
TB.
so,
There we
yeah.
go.
So, they used to believe that masturbation caused TB, and they had this weird idea where if you ejaculate, you release like part of your spirit, but if you have sex with a woman, like there's a spirit transfer or something. But if you masturbate too much, your spirit energy will go away, and then you'll get TB and die. A lot of these ancient cultures, I'm sure, had ideas on health, nutrition, medicine. Some of them were correct. Some of them might have been
Yeah,
partially correct, and a lot of
yeah.
them were wrong. I don't know why you're relying on like ancient cultures for this idea that, oh, milk must be healthy because all of these people thought milk was healthy and they used it as a treatment. They had a lot of stupid, dumb fucking beliefs that
Yeah.
went along with this. So I don't know why you're assuming
We
it to be true
we have a
without
lot of
actually looking
stupid
at
beliefs
research.
in our modern culture nowadays.
Definitely.
I mean, I try to think about it logically and pick out the good things. But you see health patterns comparing these cultures side by side, and you see that some guys
Um,
did things like really well. There's pros and cons to each
Okay,
culture.
well, one health pattern that we definitely see is that among hunter gatherers, when they have low LDL cholesterol levels, so around 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter, they
Hmm.
avoid atherosclerosis. So, again, to focus the conversation, you are trying to claim that cholesterol isn't its own direct independent risk factor for atherosclerosis, and it's a non causal factor. So, it's a warning sign that something else is a problem,
Yes.
namely inflammation. Your body elevates serum cholesterol to deal with this inflammation and help heal. Do you have any evidence for this claim?
The three. Okay, so I'm just going to sum up what I've been saying really quick. So the three big factors that I saw, there's three or four of them. There's four. So the first big factor was enzyme levels of the diet, whether the diet was high in enzymes or low in enzymes.
So, what does that affect?
So have you heard people talk about how atherosclerosis and this plaquing is like a metabolic disease? The metabolism isn't running smoothly. Have you heard that theory
Um,
before?
Kind of like, I mean, that's just sort of a general health claim, really.
So, well, so your metabolism is a list of all the chemical reactions that need to happen in your body
Okay.
in order, like, we need to pump the heart, we need to do all sorts of things. The list goes on and on and on and on. And this is why we heal better when we sleep, because we get to shut down a lot of these tasks so we can focus on healing instead of processing sight and sounds and stuff like that. And so, what does all the chemical reactions in our body? Enzymes pretty much do all of the chemicals in our body, all the chemical reactions in our body. And your enzyme levels naturally decrease as you get older because you're getting older. It's kind of like your life force. But you can, by eating certain types of foods like fermented foods and certain types of raw foods and how you prepare them correctly, you can up the enzyme levels in your blood. So one of the things that I saw is, um, and most of it was in this book, Enzyme Nutrition, is people who had a low enzyme diet had higher rates of their arteries being messed up and their hearts being messed up. So that was the first one, a low enzyme
Okay.
diet.
When they were comparing people who ate low enzyme diets, how did they do that? Did they compare like a Western population to like less modern population that was kind of living off the land, or what?
Um, so this guy right here was with his atherosclerosis patients. So this one right here, this guy he had like a practice and he treated atherosclerosis, and the people who had the worst atherosclerosis had low enzyme levels.
Okay,
Um,
where were these? So these were patients that this doctor was seeing. Where were these patients?
where this was in America
Okay, an American doctor in
in the
1958.
50s 60s.
Okay,
Um,
and what enzymes?
they were probably testing for fat enzymes, but just enzymes in general. Um,
That's like, I mean, that's just such a general thing. I don't even know what to make of it.
okay, well I'm just gonna glaze over this really quick.
Okay.
And so here, this other guy in the 1968, he tested this on the blood of dogs. And, he tested it back and forth, and he found that when the blood enzyme levels were low, um, atherosclerosis started to show up.
Okay, I know with animal experiments, you can induce atherosclerosis in dogs if you damage their thyroid gland.
Thyroid, yeah, and I think he
So
might have
there,
experimented with that too.
so there is a possibility that I guess people with heart disease that this doctor saw, maybe they had a higher rate of thyroid dysfunction.
Hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Um,
Okay, so like that's possible, but again, this doesn't really debunk the point I'm making that cholesterol is an independent direct causal factor.
okay.
So, like,
So
again, you're talking about confounding variables. I just want to see something that debunks the notion that
so
cholesterol
here,
is a direct causal factor.
the Mayo Clinic and tons of doctors practiced the milk cure. Even Hippocrates and Celsius, like these people way back in the day, um, they were using the raw milk cure to heal atherosclerosis. If we
Okay,
can dig it up, you can see the Mayo Clinic would suggest the raw milk cure for atherosclerosis. They don't do that anymore.
okay. So, do they actually have some sort of magnetic imaging or some sort of ultrasound imaging of these people's arteries before they did the raw milk cure, looking at the buildup of plaque in their arteries, and then after they did the milk cure, after a set period of time, they got more imaging data on their arteries and showed that their arteries opened up. Is there any
This was
research evidence of that?
this was 1990, so I doubt they had a lot of that stuff. But
1990?
1900.
Okay, so there isn't any actual evidence that the milk cure cured atherosclerosis because they had no imaging data.
Well, there's a lot of doctors that wrote about it in their journals and their diaries.
Okay, well, you can improve things like angina, like, if they stop experiencing heart pain. But so you're saying there's no actual imaging data showing that after they did the raw milk diet, their arteries opened up.
No, I guess I can't say that.
Okay, okay, fair enough.
But they every one of them said that they came in with heart issues and they left feeling like $1 million.
Okay, well,
And so when we look at in the 1930s is when milk pasteurization started. And this is about the same time where disease in general and atherosclerosis skyrocketed.
disease in general. Okay, so look, in the 1930s, there was like less infectious disease because of vaccines, and there was a
Yeah.
gradually declining rate of infectious disease. You don't like again. I don't see this correlating with some of your claims where you
So this
said,
is this is killing the enzymes in the diet, pasteurizing the
okay,
milk. And then we also brought in the refrigerator, which pretty much kills the demand for fermented foods, which is also high in enzymes.
okay,
And again, this is all stuff our ancestors were doing. They were eating lots of fermented foods and eating lots of raw milk and stuff like that. You can eat those exact same foods, but just mess with the enzyme content and totally mess things up. And here's a picture of an Eskimo. I mean, look how she looks super happy and she's super old. And we see
how
pictures
old?
like this, like, I don't know how old she is. These
How
people,
do you know she's super old? She could be 30.
okay. Well,
Well,
she
she
looks,
looks old, sure.
yeah, I doubt she's 30.
Well, I
Um,
doubt it too. She could be 50.
I,
That's not exactly what I'd call super old.
but she looks healthy. Like her skin's healthy. She
Not
has a full
really.
set of
She
teeth.
looks like an old lady.
She doesn't look like the old ladies nowadays where they'd be like
I don't
hunched
know.
over and
Like
stuff.
I've seen a 70-year-old woman who's been eating a vegan diet for a long, long time.
Hmm.
Let me actually pull that photo up. 70-year-old vegan woman. Let's just see. Yeah, okay, so I can actually find it in Google. I'll just
Okay.
do the screen sharing
All
again.
right. So I'm almost done with the
So, well,
raw
wait, just
argument.
just a moment. So this woman is 70 years old,
Okay.
being eating a vegan diet most of her life. Okay, so like again, I can pull up anecdotal examples. They don't really mean anything.
Okay. All right. So to finish the raw argument, the Eskimos were eating things raw. They were eating all their fat raw, so they were able to metabolize. They their bodies, their metabolism was running smoothly because they were managing their enzymes and their metabolism correctly. And
Oh,
we see this again
okay.
here.
Again, is there any actual evidence for this? Do you have any studies on
Every
diets and
single
their
Arctic
enzyme?
animal, like even polar bears, doesn't matter if all of them eat super high fat diets because everything's really fat up there,
That's
and they
fine.
don't have atherosclerosis,
That's fine. But again,
whether
so
it's a
first of all,
bear or a
wait a
whale
second. Well,
or a
wait a
human.
second. wait a second. I've already brought up the point that having a diet high in saturated fat and cholesterol doesn't necessarily mean you have high elevated serum cholesterol levels.
And this is what's keeping
Secondly,
it low. Their metabolism is
secondly,
operating smoothly.
well, no, secondly, do you have any evidence that eating high enzyme foods or fermented foods would maintain low serum cholesterol levels, even if you're eating a high saturated fat cholesterol diet? Do you have any actual evidence for that?
These animals and humans that were eating these high cholesterol diets that was also high in enzymes had lower rates of atherosclerosis and heart disease.
Okay.
And I know I don't have like meta-analysis to support that claim.
I'm
But
not even necessarily asking for meta-analyses. Like, again, you're claiming that a diet high in enzymes and high in fermented foods works to keep cholesterol levels down or at least prevent atherosclerosis,
it
because
makes
I'm not entirely because I think you're trying to suggest that you can have very elevated serum cholesterol levels while having low incidences of atherosclerosis. Do you have any actual evidence of that? Like where there's a population where they have very low rates of atherosclerosis despite eating diets high in saturated fat, and the enzymes in fermented foods in particular they're eating are have like a causal link to lowering the rates of heart disease.
well,
Like, is there any data at all relating to that?
I just showed these. I mean, these are lab studies we could look up. The ones where I showed the low enzyme levels and versus the high enzyme levels in the blood. I mean, we could look those
Okay,
up and get into that in more detail.
okay. Well, you know what? I'll take your word for it that that doctor found lower enzyme levels among people who had atherosclerosis. I don't
It was
see how
multiple doctors, but
Sure,
okay.
okay, sure. Let's just say this is established medical fact. People with atherosclerosis have lower enzyme levels.
Okay.
I don't
Which
see how
means
that
their
would be
metabolism runs slower and they can't do the
right.
things in their body to be healthy because
Okay, okay, sure.
they're behind the ball.
Sure, I still don't see how that debunks the fact that elevated serum cholesterol is a direct causal risk factor, because again, that could just be a confounding factor. It's like diabetes. Diabetes is a huge risk factor for heart disease.
Yes. And
Just
that's
because
also another if you have diabetes, that's also another sign that your body isn't operating the way it should.
So right. So, I could say people with heart disease have way higher rates of diabetes, which is true, but that
Uh-huh.
doesn't mean diabetes is the causal factor. You
Yeah.
can have heart
Exactly.
disease but not have diabetes. So it's the same thing with this enzyme idea. Just because people who have atherosclerosis have lower
I agree
enzyme
with you
levels,
on
that
that.
doesn't
I
mean it's
think this is a factor. It's not
okay.
like if you do this, then you must have this. It's like part of the equation.
Okay, you know what? I think what you really need to do, which would kind of put a hole in my whole argument, is find some sort of research where they found people with elevated serum cholesterol and their serum cholesterol is being elevated for some time,
Hmm.
and they have lower rates of atherosclerosis compared to the general population, or like no or minimal evidence of atherosclerosis. Because right now there's converging lines of data showing that elevated serum cholesterol is a direct causal factor for atherosclerosis, including the genetic data I showed you. If you could actually find me people who have genetically higher serum cholesterol scores,
Hmm.
but that isn't coincided with higher rates of atherosclerosis,
Hmm.
or like you better yet, you could find populations of people who have elevated serum cholesterol but virtually no evidence of atherosclerosis, that would put a hole in my whole argument. So is there any kind of
Okay.
data suggesting that?
First, before we go into that, I just want to overview what I think are like the three or four biggest factors. And so we
Okay,
went over
sure.
the low enzymes, the low
Okay.
enzyme levels. This is pretty much mismanagement of your metabolism.
Oh, by the way, if low enzyme levels are a risk factor here, is there any data, even in like animal studies, where they lowered the enzyme count and they induced atherosclerosis that way?
Well, I guess you technically do that through diet.
Okay.
And when we looked at, remember those rat studies we looked at, those were all low enzyme diets, all of them.
Um, the
No,
problem
they
is
were
there
not
were
eating. None of those
the
were like raw
the
fermented
problem
foods they were
is
feeding the rats. That's
The problem is there were higher rates of atherosclerosis, and atherosclerosis was induced faster when they were eating a diet high in saturated fat and cholesterol.
That might have been true. That I think that was true, but we're still okay. So all right, I'm gonna go into the other factors. So low
Okay,
enzyme,
sure.
and this is my belief. You know, you don't have to agree with it.
Sure.
Low enzyme levels in the blood. The second one being the anti-nutrients in plant foods. And when we look at what our ancestors were doing, what Weston A. Price was looking at, every single one of these primitive cultures were deactivating these anti-nutrients so they could eat these plants safely. And so I think that's another factor. It's just damaging the body and just making things worse and worse in the body. And then the third one is infection. And they have found candida on these plaques, and that overall damages your health.
Okay.
And so those are to me, those are like the three big things. You know, it's an equation. So like those three variables can affect. Like when I look at it, when I come at it with from like my gut disease background and how to fix gut disease, like this is the approach that I look at this sort of stuff with. If someone told me I had atherosclerosis and I needed to do something about it, like this is where I would start looking and start prodding.
Okay. And do you have any sort of data? Like, you know what? Let me bring up the study I showed you before. So there's data like this. So
yeah.
look, there's data like this. Normal LDL cholesterol levels are associated with subclinical atherosclerosis in the absence of risk factors. So if you could show me a study that's designed like this, but the people at the high end of the cholesterol score had basically near the same or the same kind of levels of atherosclerosis as the people at the low. Do you have anything like that?
I don't have that. That would be a good study to have.
Okay, so you know what? Oh god.
That shit.
So you know what? I think this is a good time to wrap up, and you can say like what you want to say to kind of round out your argument. And so basically, I'm just going to repeat the same thing I said at the beginning here. So there's multiple converging lines of data showing that LDL cholesterol is a direct causal risk factor. So we have data on hunter-gatherer populations, wild primates, wild animals, and it all shows that they all tend to have very low cholesterol levels in the range of 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter, where you don't see atherosclerosis occur. And you can see the American adult population is way out here. They have the highest rates of atherosclerosis. We also have randomized controlled trials on lipid-lowering drugs where, again, low cholesterol levels are associated with lower rates of atherosclerosis.
And again, so I just want to point out one thing. Go back to that graph with the cholesterol. Up a little bit more. The other one.
So up here.
Yeah. So these American humans, the adult American, they are not following the ancestral diet. They are not managing. They're not getting the nutrients they need. They're not managing their metabolism with fermented and high enzyme foods.
Well, look, I'd agree with you on some level there, where confounding variables like eating more processed food, being overweight, smoking, that definitely contributes to the higher rates of atherosclerosis. But given the converging lines of data, it's pretty clear just from this evidence alone that high LDL is a direct causal risk factor. And I think what really puts the nail in the coffin is this genetic
populations
research.
were eating high levels of cholesterol, yet their LDL was low. Those primitive populations we just looked at.
Well, that's actually a good point. Maybe before we end, we can actually talk about that.
Okay.
So these populations, they weren't actually all eating high cholesterol diets. So
let's look at. I saw the Eskimos. Yeah, what were they again?
Well, no, let's go back. There were the Eskimos, and they had the highest cholesterol score of any of these populations.
What's the Hadza?
The Hadza? Their diet is, at least for a large portion of the year, like the rainy season, it's very plant-based. They eat a lot of honey. So their diet is typically low in cholesterol and low in saturated fat. Also,
Tanzania.
I believe the pygmies were in here. Yeah, the pygmies. So they eat a lot of fruits, vegetables, also relatively low in saturated fat and cholesterol.
Hmm.
And also, what you have to keep in mind here is that they're primitive cultures. They don't have immediate access to food. So they tend to have lower calorie diets. They tend to
Hmm.
exercise more. They tend to have lower body mass, which are all factors that lower your cholesterol. And very importantly, they tend to have high rates of parasitic infection and infectious disease, which both directly and indirectly lower cholesterol either by metabolizing cholesterol in your body. So a lot of parasites will actually eat up saturated fat and cholesterol. And a lot of infectious diseases will just make you sick, not want to eat. And that also has an indirect
Here,
effect on your cholesterol.
here's a question:
Sure.
Is the infection eating up your cholesterol and lowering your score, or is it depleting your body of the cholesterol it needs to heal? Because after a while, your body is just going to go, I don't have the resources to build cholesterol anymore, and then the levels go down, like any vitamin in your blood.
I'm not entirely sure, but I mean, there's people like Jimmy Moore. He was talking about this at a conference. Jimmy Moore is like a big low carb, high cholesterol, saturated fat dude. His total cholesterol score, I believe, he said it was normally around 300, 350. He got the flu and he went into the doctor's office because he was really sick. So he just went to the doctor to get some help. His cholesterol plummeted to 150, and that's only like after 3 days or something. So I'd imagine the infection itself might have like a direct impact on cholesterol production in the body, but I also think a huge factor is just the confounding variables of it just making you sick, not want to eat. I'd say that would probably have a bigger impact than the disease's direct impact on cholesterol production if I had to guess, but I don't really know too much. All I really know is that disease definitely does have an impact on your cholesterol score through direct or indirect means. So, all those factors taken into consideration, they don't have immediate access to food, higher levels of exercise, lower calorie diets. They don't eat much saturated fat and cholesterol to begin with, generally. They have lower body mass, and they also suffer from infectious and parasitic diseases more often. That all factors in to make them have pretty low cholesterol scores, even considering some of them do eat diets that are relatively higher in saturated fat and cholesterol than even a standard American diet. So all those you do have to keep all those factors in mind. Also, just the genetic data. It just completely puts the nail in the coffin. Even among people who smoke cigarettes, have high rates of like hypertension, just generally unhealthy populations, a 28% reduction in mean LDL cholesterol has an 88% reduction in the risk of coronary heart disease. So that just proves it beyond any reasonable doubt that cholesterol has a direct impact on serum cholesterol. And I think for the most part, you've conceded with a lot of what I've been saying here. So I think at some point you did say that the healthy normal physiological range for LDL cholesterol is 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter. And you didn't agree with me that elevated serum cholesterol is a direct causal risk factor. It's a non-causal factor. Inflammation is the biggest issue here. Well, you didn't really provide evidence for that. And again, we have huge meta-analyses proving that saturated fat and cholesterol elevate serum cholesterol. So if you're going to claim that inflammation is what raises cholesterol, then you just have to provide evidence for that. And again, just based on the genetic research, like even people who smoke, once they lower their cholesterol levels, lower rates of heart disease. So if you're going to claim that, cholesterol is just the ambulance, there's just no evidence for that in my opinion. So I'd say I have the debate won just because more overall evidence is on my side. So that's my closing statement. You can say whatever you want now. Oh, did he disconnect? Oh shit. What happened? Okay, that's a little weird. Hopefully he can reconnect. I didn't notice him go missing. Let me. I'll message Jasmine because she has the email open. I don't know why he disconnected. It probably has something to do with his internet connection. It was a little spotty this entire time. So hopefully he can reconnect because I would like him to make his closing statements just to be fair. Let's just give him a little bit of time. I messaged Jasmine to try to get into contact with him. But basically, like, he made a few claims that kind of poked a hole in my theory if he could back it up with evidence. So like when I proved, okay, well, the healthy normal physiological range for serum cholesterol is 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter. Once you go above that range, atherosclerosis occurs. Well, then he claimed, oh, well, it's inflammation that's causing these plaques to build up. Well, and then as a result, these plaques form because of the inflammation, and your body elevates cholesterol to deal with this inflammation. So cholesterol is wrongly correlated with the disease when it's just inflammation. Well, there's two problems for that. First of all, he didn't provide any evidence that inflammation itself elevates serum cholesterol. And on top of that, if inflammation itself is what causes these plaques to build up, then you'd still see plaque formation when people have cholesterol scores in the range of 50 to 70 milligrams per deciliter. But if you actually look at the research, that doesn't happen. There's just a very clear, obvious linear trend where the lower your cholesterol levels are, the less of a chance you have of atherosclerosis. And in the one study by the American College of Cardiology, from just last year, it showed people in the range of 50 to 60 milligrams per deciliter, zero atherosclerosis. Okay, so Jasmine just sent that guy a message asking if he can reconnect. It doesn't look like he's answering back. I don't really know what happened. That's kind of odd. Like maybe his internet connection just completely cut out, or maybe there's like a power outage in his building or something. Okay, let's see.
All right. There's
Oh,
like
there you are.
Comcast. There's like
Comcast?
Comcast trucks like right outside my window. I don't. It's like
Okay.
whatever.
Okay, so
All right. What were you saying?
I basically just wrapped up my whole argument. I
Okay.
just outlined, the why
Yep,
I
and I know what
believe.
your argument is. Okay.
Yeah, so just wrap it up. Just, your closing words.
Okay. My closing words are, we see, rats on high cholesterol and low cholesterol diets. We see, these Arctic animals and humans, whales and polar bears. They're on high cholesterol diets, and we don't see heart issues and artery issues, and in them. And you can see this. The data sometimes show this, and sometimes it doesn't show it. So I think those three big factors in developing heart issues and atherosclerosis are, managing your metabolism with a high enzyme diet, managing those lectins, deactivating those lectins and those anti-nutrients in plants. That's what Dr. Gundry does to help his patients. And then the last one is infection, because it just overall bogs down your body. So that's what I would do if someone told me I had atherosclerosis and I needed to do something about it. Those are the big things I would look at.
Okay, so I think people can decide for themselves after this debate, whose side they choose, what information they want to rely on. So thanks for doing the debate.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks
also
for having
glad
me
that
on,
we could keep things civil. I know sometimes it can get heated, but it's pretty cool.
man. Yeah, yeah, cool.
So,
Um,
so yeah, maybe we could set up another one of these debates some
yeah,
other
because
time.
I want
Sure.
to find the lab studies that you were asking for.
Sure.
I want to see that
Maybe.
information too.
Yeah, sure. So maybe if you find that information and you want to do this same similar debate around heart disease again, we can do that.
Okay, and I'll focus
And
more on I'll have a better idea of the numbers in the blood levels. I'll look because
okay,
I
sure.
wasn't directly looking for that. I was looking for I kind of because I kind of work from like I try to logically think things out, but it'd be nice to have that evidence.
Okay, sure. So maybe we can set up a similar debate in the future where if you do get a bit more evidence together on like this
Okay.
specific topic, we can do the same thing.
Yeah, I'd love to
So
do that.
yeah, if you could just back out and I'm just going to read the super chats and then I'll finish the stream. But
All
thanks for
right.
coming on. I'll be sure to link your channel in the description down below and I'll
Appreciate
re-upload
it, man.
on my main channel. So thanks.
All right. Thanks. Thanks
See
a
ya.
lot, Beacon Gains. Bye bye.
Okay, so Eric Soto donated $2. He asks, thoughts on life is a simulation theory, Elon Musk. There's a good chance. Like, yeah, if a society did develop the technology to simulate a universe, I'm sure they would, and I'm sure that would be pretty valuable from a like scientific perspective. You could figure out a lot of things. You could even use societies that were created in that simulation universe to create new technologies because you're going to end up with new alien life forms that could develop new technologies that you could never think of and basically steal the ideas from them. So there's a lot of practical reasons why a advanced future society would create a universe simulation. So we could be living in a simulation. What are the chances of that? There's not really any way to know. Um, I guess it could possibly be 50-50. What would it mean if we're actually living in a simulation? I don't think it would really matter. It's just another way of existence to occur, basically. So it wouldn't really change the way I value life. I just think, if we're living in a computer simulation, it's just another way for existence to express itself. So that's my answer to you. Thanks for the donation, Eric. David donated $5. He says, don't need a study to find out how to heal teeth. Just stop consuming sugars. Fasting alone will heal teeth. I don't really know too much about dental health. I haven't looked into much of the research there. But as far as I know, you can't heal cavities. Maybe that's something I would like to look into, though. So I think I will look into some of the research in healing cavities, see if any of this is true or not. But I do definitely agree. Processed sugar and just a lot of the added crap added to candy, like they do add a lot of acidic crap to candy. That makes it even worse for your teeth. So if you can just avoid that, that's massively helpful for dental health and just fucking brush. But thanks for the donation, David. Appreciate it. Nip Lee donated $2. He asks, we can now officially add water though to the list. Okay, so yeah, like he was trying to make a false analogy where he said, oh well, everyone with atherosclerosis drinks water, so therefore water causes atherosclerosis. Don't know why he made that analogy. I was comparing people with low cholesterol and high cholesterol. The people with high cholesterol have higher rates of atherosclerosis. I don't see how that analogy makes sense. So yeah, so water though, we have like donuts though, cockroaches though, a lot of those. But thanks for the donation, Lee. David donated another $5. He says, "Heal your gut, guy. Throw in the towel, man. You shouldn't have agreed to the debate." He probably shouldn't have. Not only was he unprepared, but like, I mean, the evidence is just so incredibly clear. There's just no argument, especially against the genetic research I linked. Like, unless you can come up with a study that shows as cholesterol levels elevate among the population, there's either no difference or decreasing rates of atherosclerosis among those with high cholesterol levels. You just have no argument. So, like, unless you have that data, you can't prove that cholesterol is not a causal factor in heart disease risk. You just can't. Also, like, we have things like familial hypercholesterolemia. Those people have higher rates of heart disease, and especially higher rates of deaths from heart disease when you're younger. So all the data just converges on that same point. David donated another $5. He says, "Heal Your Gut Guy, how about starting a study that will span 20 to 30 years between the carnivores, zero carb, and the vegans, zero meat, then debate?" Like, the people like Sean Baker who are eating nothing but meat, they're going to fucking get heart attacks in the next few years. Just wait and see, and I'll be there to say, I fucking told you so. That will be the biggest I told you so that has ever been I told you so. But thanks again for the donation, David. A vegan brain donated €2. He says, "You are very well prepared, Richard. I love it. Thank you. I spent the morning just getting together research, thinking about what type of arguments he'd say. The only thing I wasn't really prepared for was just talking about the French paradox. I know about it, but I didn't have the research on hand. Would have been kind of nice to just show in the debate that, the French paradox is essentially just caused by underreporting, but it is true. But thanks for the donation, Vegan Brain. And David donated another $5. He says, "Say tuberculosis 10 times as fast as you can." Shit. Tuberculosis, tuberculosis, like tuberculosis, 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 tuberculosis. Okay, that's the best I could do. So that's just one of those words I have trouble with. So thanks for checking out the debate, everyone, and special thanks to everyone who donated in Super Chat. The debate will be available on my main channel, Vegan Gains, in the next few hours. So if you missed most of the debate, you'll be able to watch it there. And as always, keep making those Finn. And Finn got a trim today. It's not as poofy. Keep making those dog trim gains.